It's really my honor to invite two bright invited speakers to this particular edition of the seminar. Just some sort of logistics first. This edition, well, actually, only the first edition and this edition are the hybrid format, where all the other editions are online. And as I said, here it's the University of Tokyo venue, and many of you are listening to this talk through Zoom webinar. It's important to actually access this QR code right now, because this is the shared seminar notes. It's kind of tradition for this seminar where we collaboratively take notes of what you hear in the seminar, like, what's interesting, the questions that arise when you're listening to the talks. And the panelists and invited speakers will actively use the content of this seminar notes when we go to the Q&A session and also the panel discussion. So please access this Google Docs right now and open it in your smartphone tab or laptop.
So what if you paste a link to the chat?
Oh, that's
maybe
that's
someone else is fine. Yeah,
someone like Yuki, who is behind the scene, can paste the link. Thank you. So for the online participants, please wait a bit for the link to come in. And also, this particular edition is actually held in collaboration with a study seminar, the paper reading seminar for AIST this year. And this will be held this Saturday, I think. And Koya is also one of the organizers of this workshop, the reading seminar. So especially for Japan-based researchers, this also scan this QR code, which will navigate you to the official website of this paper reading seminar.
I know that the language is in Japanese for this study workshop, so I'm sorry for that. Yeah.
そうです。ここだけ日本語で話しますけど、これは、主に日本語を喋っている、読み書きするような研究者、我々ですよね、が、ウィスト論文をみんなで、読むことで、言語バリアを破壊しようというものなので、主に日本語話者の方向けということでよろしくお願いします。はい。Okay, so this is the timetable. Right now, I am introducing what this seminar is, including logistics. From 13:15, Jennifer Jacobs will give an invited talk, followed by the invited talk by Koya Narumi. And between these invited talks, we plan to have 5 minutes of breaks between these talks. And then in the end, we have a panel discussion between me, Jun Kato, who is actually a host of this invited speakers, and Koya and Jennifer, followed by a short closing. So first of all, let me briefly introduce what this seminar is about. And actually, this seminar is organized by AIST, which stands for National Institute of Advanced Industrial Science and Technology, which is really a kind of big research institution in Japan. There are about 2,300 researchers in 7 research domains. So it's not only about information technology and human factors, but also there are energy and environment, life science and biotechnology, material and chemistry, electronics and manufacturing, Geological Survey of Japan, National Meteorology Institute of Japan. So there are so many researchers from this diverse background gathering at this research institute. And among all of those divisions, I am leading a kind of research initiative within the institution. Researchers in 8 teams in the information technology and human factors domain, exploring how human-computer interaction would or should look like in the future. So we kind of came up with this shared vision that people will soon be surrounded by AI-enabled tools and can or need to focus on human-specific tasks, notably creative tasks. So this is why this seminar series is called Creative HCI Seminar. And then we are, researchers from 8 teams. So we are already a diverse research. We are already having diverse research disciplines, including like me developing creativity support tools, studying human-robot interaction, designing prosthetic legs, inventing novel actuators for telepresence, modeling human behaviors in restaurants, standardizing human factors in services. So there were so many interesting researchers behind this research initiative. But for this particular seminar, it is a seminar series to introduce the state of the art in human-computer interaction research by inviting bright minds in the field. And we kind of aim to take an example-based approach to predict and discuss the future directions. So the target audiences of the seminar series are people interested in HCI research, not necessarily in those measuring in HCI, but all who could potentially jump in the field, which is really something that I am looking forward to. And while we have held the seminar in mostly a webinar style, for this particular edition, it's a hybrid format, and it's really great to have all of you for this on-site participants being here. So we really want to have a kind of face-to-face discussion within the seminar. Actually, this is the 6th edition, and this is the kind of tentatively the last edition of the seminar series. So I'd like to briefly recap the past editions. The very first edition was with focus with creativity support, followed by the AI for HCI. And then we had 2 editions which were mostly aimed at Japan-based participants who were interested in what has happened in the KAI 2023. And there were researchers from abroad, while they used to be based in Japan. So they discussed about what is the experience of working abroad. And the last edition that was held last month is about creativity support tools for artistic work. Well, actually, there were people behind the scene. These are the organizers of the seminar. And we are supported by the advisory board from the kind of bright minds in the HCI field in Japan. It's organized by AIST, co-organized by Association for Computing Machinery, SIGKAI Japan chapter too. So this particular edition, we invited two researchers, and we have the focus of HCI research in the wild. And so this is a kind of brief introduction to what the seminar is all about. So let's start the invited talk. I would like to introduce Jennifer Jacobs, Assistant Professor of Media Arts and Technology at University of California, Santa Barbara. She directs the Expressive Computation Lab, which investigates ways to support creativity of people by integrating emerging computational creation with manual design practices. She runs an artist in residence program within her lab, which is an excellent example of research in the wild. So stage is yours. I will stop sharing the screen. And so let's welcome Jennifer Jacobs.
All right, thank you for the introduction. Can everyone hear me? Okay, wonderful. So thanks everyone for coming to this panel series. I'm delighted to present some of my research today. I'll be focusing on our efforts across my research lab to integrate computation with manual and physical production. And as Jun mentioned, the process talk about how we really rely on collaborations with practitioners, especially people working in the arts and in craft fields, to inform the technical features of our research in this space. So there are kind of 2 big ideas that I try to get across with the work that I produce. First, I really hope to make a case by the end of this talk that computational and manual forms of creation are not mutually exclusive. And I'm making this argument despite current trends in automation, where there's a lot of focus on using computational automation to replace traditionally manually executed tasks. And then second, I'm going to argue that by connecting emerging technological methods with traditional practices, this is a really powerful way to develop innovative and impactful future computational tools. So I'll come back to these. But to give a little context for the work that I do, I'd like to introduce a bit about my lab and show a range of the spaces that we're working in before diving in detail to some specific ideas. So I run a group called the Expressive Computation Lab that's located under 2 departments within the College of Engineering, Computer Science, and Media Arts and Technology. And as a part of my lab, although we are primarily a human-computer interaction lab, I advise and collaborate with students and faculty with backgrounds across engineering, art, and design. And this variety is really reflected in the range of work that we create. So much of the focus in our lab is in the space of systems engineering research, often in the software domain. This is kind of a more recent example. This is a work by the student, former student, now graduated, Sonia Hashem. Sonia developed a approach to enable motion graphics designers to use hand-drawn vector paths to specify procedural functions to transform spatial, stylistic, and geometric properties over time. So the idea of pushing the limits of what is possible with direct manipulation in contexts where normally a symbolic programming language be required. This system is a great example of the overarching approach we take in our lab of a human-centered design model. So we're not the only ones who use this approach, but we spend a lot of time initially trying to understand the existing practices of practitioners in the domain we're targeting. In this case, Sonia interviewed direct manipulation and symbolic motion graphics creators, people who use both of those tools as a way to inform the development of her abstractions and interactions in her system. We've been recently expanding upon this work to do more in-depth research into the workflows and practices of professional artists, designers, and craftspeople. These are images from a recent paper that we just published in collaboration with researchers at the University of Washington, focusing on the use of digital fabrication in low volume commercial product production. So we interviewed a series of creators who work across different domains and use different types of textile-based, additive, and subtractive digital fabrication methods to design and manufacture products for sale. And the goal of conducting these kinds of studies is both to understand the relationship between the objectives of creativity support researchers within HCI and the motivations and challenges experienced by professional creators. In addition to that, we are trying to directly draw from the technical expertise and contributions of communities of practice to inform future HCI systems research. Increasingly, we're expanding to the space of physical production and working not just building tools to work with existing physical materials and machines, but also investigating the design of novel materials. This is work that was a component of recent graduate Mayor Hirsch's doctoral dissertation. Mayor developed a method for 3D printing sodium acetate via sodium acetate crystallization. And these real-time videos show how Mayor refined this method to support 3D printing at a rate that's faster than thermoplastic printing, but also allows for structures that would be difficult to achieve with a standard thermoplastic printer, or really a lot of different additive fabrication materials like this unsupported overhang. A lot of our work, as I mentioned, we have students who have backgrounds in the fine arts. I myself am not an artist, but I have a background in the fine arts as well. And so we use the process of producing artwork as another lens for inquiry into technology development. This is a dynamic soft robotic sculpture created by PhD student Samuel Bourgault. And although our focus is often not in the space of art production, creating works of art and design provides students with the opportunities to examine the affordances of computational media in the process of making artifacts. We really focus on a close integration between teaching and research outcomes. This is especially true for our focus on digital fabrication, where often the technologies are changing really rapidly, as in many cases in computer science, and so we also have to update our teaching methods. This is an illustrative work by a student in one of my computational fabrication classes. This is work by Jaylene Lee, and she adopted a technique for unconventional 3D printing with about a very affordable very affordable regular 3D printer. Adopted this technique by researchers at Texas A&M to print textile-like structures, and she used that to create hammocks for her baby turtles, who are pets. Finally, we also focus on finding ways to take the technologies that we've developed And as quickly as possible, though we're currently working on doing this more effectively, turn them into platforms that can be used by communities of practice. So this is another digital fabrication work that was published at CHI last year by Ashley DeValle, Mert Toka, and Alejandro Aponte. The goal here was to find a way to integrate textile production with 3D printing. So they developed a novel TPU-based structure that could support the specific kind of embroidery. We really quickly adapted that approach to support a series of craft workshops and activities for middle school students, where we actually expanded the technique to work on introducing people to a variety of methods in which they can use unconventional forms of 3D printing and parametric design to create personal functional artifacts. So that's a broad overview of a lot of the spaces we're in. The work of our lab is extremely varied, but our work is unified by our emphasis on computation as a medium for making things, which is really a focus of my talk today. So computers increasingly shape how and what we make, and different computing paradigms, both established and emerging, offer creators new ways to think and new spaces to make in. Any expression within a computing space is mediated by the design and structure of computational tools. And by a computational tool, what I mean is any tool that enables the creation of work through a series of rules, models, or instructions that can be maintained and executed by a computer. So computational tools, under my definition, although this is maybe always expanding, can encompass anything from symbolic programming environments and parametric CAD to automatic algorithmic filters and CNC machines. Like any tool, computational tools both extend and constrain the capabilities of different people with respect to their implementation. So we rely a lot on the creative coding language processing in educational settings. Processing allows artists to create dynamic work, but it also requires them to work through a symbolic, and in this case, textual description of the work itself. The process of building and designing computational tools is challenging, so I probably don't have to tell you that. Part of the challenge for us stems from the nature of human production. Different people make work in vastly different ways. So the key properties of creative production workflows are difficult to define, highly complex, and also steeped in tradition. To give an idea of the role of making traditions, it's hard to address in a talk that covers a lot of subjects, but this quote from Mark Churchill, who's a ceramicist who we've worked with, talks about some of the key elements. So here he's describing his attitude towards high fire ceramics, which is kind of the one of the most difficult forms of ceramics. And he mentions how his motivation for pursuing this space is tied to the material qualities of the process and the ability of this to, in some ways, replicate aspects of natural geothermal phenomena. So these factors that are rooted in the material and the history of his tradition shape both what he makes and his motivation for making. It's also difficult to design computational tools because while making traditions may have a long established tradition, computation itself is constantly changing. New platforms are regularly emerging as existing platforms are reshaped or rendered obsolete. And the rapid change of computational platforms can shape attitudes towards using computational tools. And in particular, it can incentivize novelty and rapid adoption of new techniques. So this is an idea that's illustrated from a quote from our interview with the open source advocate and new media artist, Christopher Coleman. At the time, he was talking about convolutional neural networks as a technology for image generation. Now, this has changed tremendously. And Chris described how to use these technologies, he and other artists engage in a race to find the edges of emerging platforms, saying that you have to constantly find new aesthetics or what the aesthetics are that everyone's working in, and you just need to push beyond. So this really highlights a way that some artists are distinguished from other types of creators in that, like researchers actually, there's a strong incentive for novelty in their work. Finally, computational tools are often extremely brittle. They require the correctness of many low-level elements to function, and this structure can limit the adoption of domain-specific interface and interaction strategies. And it often also encourages developers, designers, and us as researchers to build tools as standalone siloed packages. There can be strong advantages to this approach, but there are also limitations, particularly for software applications that are represented as standalone packages. So the creative opportunities of computational paradigms contrasted with the restrictions of existing computational tools really suggests the need for new methods to inform computational tool design and implementation. The objective of my research is twofold. First, I want to support creators in using computation in productive and powerful and expressive forms. And while I don't think everyone needs to use computation to produce work, I really believe that it has powerful benefits when contextualized and developed in a meaningful and compatible manner. Second, I really focus on this notion of the benefit of a breadth of approaches in computational tool design. And I seek to find ways to foster the growth of diverse domain-specific computational technologies for making, not just in the tools of our own lab, but in the work that other people are doing as well. A lot of our approach, as I alluded to at the start of this talk, is in the space of system engineering. So we engineer complex working interactive systems, both in the software space and also in the hardware space, to explore how computation can enable creators to integrate computational, physical, and manual creation. We often work in developing these systems in dialogue and increasingly in collaboration with communities of practice, which has meant working with people ranging from oil painters to low volume manufacturing companies to craftspeople. And also we work with people who rely on digital tools already, but don't program, for example, illustrators, although many illustrators do program. A lot of the work we also focus on is in understanding how the types of outcomes that artists create with the tools, or that we create together with the tools we're building, illustrate the capacity for a given system or technology to support an individual stylistic approach or range of outcomes. And then we also care about more traditional HCI metrics like efficiency and speed of production, because these things matter in professional practice. So I want to shift gears and talk about some specific projects that tackle these challenges in a little greater detail. I'm going to focus on two research avenues in the remainder of the talk today. The first is integrating manual creation with computer programming through domain-specific programming environments. And then the second is broadening computational making through the collaborative production of computational fabrication technologies. I come from a background, actually, as I mentioned, in fine art, although I'm not an artist, but one of the spaces that I was really engaged in early on was manual drawing and illustration. And when I became introduced to programming, I was immediately struck by how programming itself is such a powerful tool for creation, but how it was fundamentally different from my experience with manual execution, especially manual drawing. And in pursuing this interest, I conducted interviews with visual artists and designers who engage in manual execution, focused on understanding how they express their ideas through manual expression, and how programming, or their perception of programming, was something that they viewed as being supportive or an obstacle to the things that they wanted to create. This is a quote from the illustrator and fine artist Chantel Martin. She is a prolific, large-scale illustrator. You can see some of her work in the background. And her quote kind of illustrates a common theme across a lot of the interviews that I had with artists, where she places a lot of importance on the direct connection between her hands and her work, generating ideas. So she described how programming, which she had some experience with, was powerful. It lacked the gestural and physical qualities of drawing, and contrasted that with her drawing process, stating that I'm very head to hand when I'm creating. So literally drawing as a physical act, being a cognition, a method for cognition and ideation. One thing I like to point out here is that I also spoke extensively with artists whose primary medium is symbolic programming. And one thing that was interesting is they also expressed frustration with the aesthetics and the workflow of symbolic programming languages in comparison to manual expression. So these experiences led to a research question: how can we develop programming environments that support the integration of procedural expression and drawing by hand? to inform approaches to this question, I looked a lot at artists who use programming in their work, but whose aesthetic output seem to be highly gestural or evoke qualities of manual drawing. This is one example, the work by Eric Natsky. In this case, the way Eric's produced this work, this was almost over 10 years ago now, but I still think it's a fundamental work, is that he authored a custom software tool that enabled him to draw freely with a digital stylus, while the software automatically modified the color and quality of his stroke by referencing input data, often in the form of JPEG data. And this was often a common theme in a lot of the artists I spoke with, is that they actually use programming as a means to design their own drawing tools. They let them integrate drawing by hand with procedural styles or effects they had designed. I thought that was a really cool idea. So I thought about building a system that was focused around a general approach to that, supporting that practice. And the resulting tool is a system we call dynamic brushes, which is an environment for personal drawing tool creation that enables manual artists to create ad hoc procedural tools that transform manual drawing input. The dynamic brushes system is divided between a pressure-sensitive tablet and stylus and a desktop, laptop, or monitor. The artist uses the tablet to author artwork with the dynamic drawing tools they've defined. And they use the desktop interface, which has a visual programming environment, to author brush behaviors. So what is a brush behavior? Programming in dynamic brushes is structured around this idea that you're building your own tools, and we call them brushes. So brushes are interactive drawing objects that respond to manual input from the artist. And each brush object has properties that define the style and geometric transformation of its stroke. The programming model is centered around three core constructs. First, property mappings, which are declarative mappings between input data and brush properties. So the primary form of input is stylus properties, but mappings can also use generators as input. Here you see an example. Generators are sequences of values that correspond to a given function, like modulation within a sine function. Mappings are organized within states, and states describe collections of property mappings that hold true when the state is active. So event-driven transitions enable state change, and then transitions occur on a variety of triggers, including stylus events, geometric events, and intervals of time. And then lastly, individual transitions can contain actions, which are just discrete methods that get called once on the transition. And I'll talk more about why these are useful in a moment. So the addition of generators enable conventional drawing brushes to be converted into unconventional ones. For example, a brush that modulates the scale with a square wave, creating an undulating pattern as the artist draws. And this really basic approach of modulating stylus input with the generators leads to the possibility of creating a wide range of different outcomes. But the primary quality of them is determined by where the artist is drawing by hand. So a different person drawing with the same brush could have a different output. We also kind of talking about some of the more computationally powerful things the system can do. One of the most powerful aspects of programming is that it can be used to perform multiple actions simultaneously. This is often a foundation behind a lot of procedural artwork produced with symbolic tools. And dynamic brushes enable similar effects by allowing one brush to generate new brushes. This is facilitated by the spawn action, which enables a brush to generate a set number of instances of any other behavior, including its own. So artists can use automated timer-driven behaviors to augment natural strokes by creating something like a drip brush, where a timer regularly spawns these independent drawing drips. If you're curious, there's lots more examples of what's possible with the system on our website. So I'm gonna skip up. I'm happy to talk more about how we evaluated these technologies, and I'll talk a little bit of our evaluation at the end, but if you have questions later on about specific evaluation of dynamic brushes, please feel free to ask me. One thing I want to talk directly about, though, is the work we've done more recently to build on this tool. So as I mentioned, we augment a traditional drawing interface with a symbolic programming environment. The programming environment is a visual language. We're building off of ideas of existing visual programming languages, which can reduce some of the barriers. But it doesn't change the fact that artists are still relying on describing a description of a procedure that they want to take place. So the same challenges around debugging and linking output to procedure exist in dynamic brushes as they would in any other programming environment. So this led to a new research question: how can we help visual artists understand their programs? And our hypothesis here was that we wanted to link and visualize program parameters and state within the artwork. So we built a new system, which we called demystified dynamic brushes. This was work that was done in collaboration with Jingyi Li, who really led a lot of the development efforts on some of this work. Demystified dynamic brushes extends, or call it DDB for short, extends the dynamic brushes programming environment with linked visualizations and interactions to examine program parameters at state during authoring time. So DDB contains visual inspectors that lie on top of the artwork that show otherwise invisible parameters like stylus input or brush properties, which are aimed to help artists reason about their programs. And because the numerical labels are displayed next to the artwork itself, artists don't have to interrupt their drawing process and context switch into reading a table of values, which is really in contrast to existing creative coding systems. The visual inspectors are supported by DDB's direct selection feature, which lets an artist touch their artwork at any point and then jump in the symbolic program inspector to the program state when that part was drawn. And then DDB also contains a looping function that lets artists focus on exploring and quickly changing values while they're engaged in drawing. So while looping, artists get immediate feedback about how their brush changes when they make an edit to the symbolic program while holding the stylus input constant. We also included more traditional code stepping features in the visual programming environment. So like looping and direct selection, stepping is another way to control program state and visualize incremental changes to the artwork. But this is designed for a more slower and methodological inspection of program parameters. So far I've primarily talked about systems that focus on visual output, but computation is remarkable in part due to its ability to blend different modalities. This is something that is really a driving force around why many creators are attracted to code as a creative medium. So we've built on the idea of dynamic brushes to support another vein of research looking at multimodal computational production. And we were particularly focused on this idea of could we support expressive multimodal creation by enabling artists to use drawing to design across different modalities. The resulting tool that we explored in this space is called Megafauna. This was work that was led by my current PhD student, Sam Bourgault. Megafauna is a drawing-based environment for audio-visual expression that's inspired by live coding. Megafauna enables the real-time production and automatic synchronization of hand-drawn animations and sound, as well as the control of audio-visual parameters using a sketch-based interface. So I'm going to try to show something with sound, and we'll see how it goes. I will maybe play this walkthrough and then describe what's happening. So to go a little bit over and sorry, I couldn't talk over the video as it's playing, but it creates feedback. To talk a little bit about what's happening here, in brief, what you're seeing Sam do with the system is use drawing in kind of 3 different modalities. One is to literally author elements of the animation frame by frame really quickly. Another is to draw elements that describe the progression of the animation in different ways. So this object right here shows the timeline of the animation. By erasing it, you can mute certain portions along the animation. If I skip back, we have also a separate drawing modality that allows Sam to control both procedural instantiation and placement of the visual qualities, and also control over the audio synthesis that's automatically mapped to each frame within the animation. So by manipulating these graphs, both for the animation instances and also for the audio qualities, you can generate things like progressions of sequences, chords, and harmonies. The goal of Megafauna was to develop this system in a way that could be used for live performance. So it's fast enough to be applied to live performance. And one of the ways that we evaluated this, actually this work has since been published, is developing a 1-hour live performance with the system, and then actually executing it and getting critiques on that system from professional performing artists and animators. So here you see a revised version of the system that Sam developed to support the execution of this live performance. So the work of dynamic brushes, Megafauna, and DDV offers a way to reshape how we might think about designing computational interfaces for different kinds of creative practices and different audiences. At an initial level, it suggests opportunities for systems researchers to develop new representations and interfaces that work across multiple modalities, but are appropriate for specific audiences, like a music composition tool that's maybe targeted at people who are working in the domain and tools associated with game design. At a secondary level, it suggests the opportunities for research platforms aimed at supporting collaboration within multimodal work. So meta interfaces in which a domain expert can develop appropriate representations for collaborators. And this might be similar to how in the space of 3D animation, character riggers set up expressive interfaces for animators in the form of a skeleton for the character. We could broaden this idea to different domains. So a system for developing projection mapping for a theater director, for example. And then finally, the third level, it offers the potential to consider how domain experts are often best positioned to develop the interfaces that fit the specific modalities they're working in. This suggests for the opportunity for research into how we help people create and use personal representations and interfaces. And one of the spaces that we're looking actively at the space is creative coding communities and artists who are simultaneously building tools for other artists and also using the same tools they're developing to make their own work. So at the start of this talk, I argued that computation and manual forms of creation are not mutually exclusive. And my research in programming environments to combine manual creation and computational expression help illustrate this point by showing how computational tools that integrate manual making and computational processes can dramatically expand the expressive potential of computers by bringing to bear different people's manual skills and expression to this process. All right, now I want to talk about a related argument that I made at the start, that combining emerging technologies with traditional practices is really a key space for building future innovative computational tools. For this, I'm going to talk about my efforts in broadening participation in computational making in the space of computational fabrication. So computational fabrication is a very broad domain that encompasses a lot of spaces, but the way I often define it is that it's a space that encompasses computational design, often known as generative or algorithmic design, with digital fabrication. So a form is designed by writing a program and then constructed, which produces some kind of design representation. This part is most complex. We'll talk about it more. And then through this form is partially constructed via a fabrication machine like a 3D printer to produce a physical artifact. And I would say the key takeaway in this representation is like everything that is meaningful in this process happens between where these arrows are. There's a lot of complexity there. One of the reasons computational fabrication is exciting to me initially is its potential to support new audiences in computing, because it enables people to literally use code to convert that into physical artifacts. And this is something that is going to be uniquely appealing in ways that creating digital animations and video games are appealing to different types of people. So some of my earliest work really focused on enabling people who were totally new to the space of computational design and physical making to use computational fabrication as an expressive tool. This was a really early project I worked on for enabling people to use computational fabrication to customize and design physical home goods, artifacts, lamps, and clothing. And kind of this is some of the outcomes of that research, which shows sort of in the hands of people who are totally new to digital fabrication and in some cases programming, these technologies can really support remarkable types of design and production. More recently, we have focused on the ways in which computational fabrication offers opportunities for professional designers and manufacturers. And one of the reasons this space is particularly exciting to me is the ways in which many forms of digital fabrication enable working with the same materials that have long been established in manual craft fields. So there are a variety of machines that are capable of working with textiles and textile approaches in manners similar to manual textile production. CNC mills can perform subtractive operations on solid material like wood, offering the opportunity to extend spaces like woodworking. And then as kind of part of our most recent focus, additive technologies can work with materials that are traditionally used in manual craft, in particular, working with clay. So Clay 3D printing has really become an inquiry site for some of the work that we're doing now in looking at how we can support professionals from non-digital practices to use emerging computational technologies. In the process of looking at this space, we're also interested in understanding what we can learn from people who are working in these traditional spaces. So when we're talking about fabrication, digital fabrication I view as an extension in many ways of manual craft. What knowledge from traditional making is absent in how we're thinking about building emerging digital fabrication technologies? So the approach that we've taken to investigate these two lines of inquiry is to build new computational fabrication techniques and technologies through collaborative making with craft professionals. One of the reasons we're relying on collaborative making relates to the nature of craft practice. The key qualities of physical design and making are often difficult to understand through observation or verbal discussion alone. And many craft disciplines are defined by tacit knowledge they're intertwined with complex cultural factors. These images show two New Mexico potters' work. So Patty Bilbro throwing on the wheel, which is, if you ever tried to explain to somebody verbally how to throw on a wheel, it's very difficult, something you can only experience by actually trying to do it. And then this is a vessel by the Coche de Pueblo artist, Jeff Suina. Jeff is really remarkable in combining the traditional patterns of his Coche de Pueblo ancestors, but using emerging technologies and techniques and often digital design tools in how he approaches his work. So clay 3D printing offers a particularly interesting space to study this intersection of old and new and physical materials and digital and computational methods. One of the exciting spaces in this is that clay 3D printers are increasingly diverse and flexible in their compatibility with manual ceramics materials. This is a 3D printer printing in our lab. It's printing out a clay that we processed from clay we literally gathered from the beach about 3 miles away from our lab. They're kind of just dirt extruders at the end of the day. We structured our collaborative methodology through a formal residency program that was open to ceramics practitioners in North America. And I want to stress this work was a collaborative effort. So Professor Leah Beakley, along with Professors Manuel Montoya, Tim Castillo, and Ted Hohola at the University of New Mexico are also conducting this work in collaboration with my lab. I'll talk a little bit about the residency structure. If you have, a lot of people ask specifically about like how we ran it in terms of the administration. And I would say the most salient takeaways, it was 3 months long. And during those 3 months, we paid artists at a rate that was equivalent about to what we would pay a postdoctoral scholar working in our lab. This is at the higher end of what we found for payment for artist residencies, but given the expectations that we were asking artists, this was sort of a necessary component for the contributions they were making. Another kind of component of it was that artists retained the ownership over all the physical projects that they created, and then the software we developed will be released as open source.
So who is eligible for this residence? Students or?
It was anybody at the time for the first residency, it was anybody within North America. And this was partially because it was a National Science Foundation funded research project. So initially their guidance was to focus on American practitioners. We expanded it in the second residency. We are currently building plans to do a additional residency, and we have started to get interest from people who are working outside of the US. And there are, and one notable thing I should mention, particularly working in California, we are collaborating with an art historian focused on ceramics work. The vast majority of modern Californian ceramics is heavily influenced by Japanese ceramic traditions. So a lot of the work that some of the practitioners in our residencies were created was inspired by traditions in Japanese ceramic production. It would be amazing to do some form of this work in Japan. So as I mentioned, we've done 2 iterations of this residency. In our lab, we've so far hosted 4 different residents, 2 in each iteration. Avi Farber, Pilar Wiley, Raina Lee, and Unha Payak. All of these residents were at the same time. There were 2 other residents at our sister lab in New Mexico, run by Professor Leah Beakley. The residency structure initially focused a lot on the exploration of parametric technologies for computer-aided design and also computer-aided machining for clay, prototyping initially in tools like Rhino and Grasshopper, and then moving to standalone systems as we developed it. And then there was also an emphasis on integrating manual and digital techniques. So here you can see an example of Avi Farber printing vessels with one of our clay 3D printers, and then taking those vessels off the printer, throwing them on the wheel to refine some elements of that. And the focus on the residency, although it wasn't exclusive, was often on producing functional work, although we did have artists who also produced work that was more in a sculptural space. So there's a lot of different outcomes of the work. Many of these fall within spaces that are common to HCI creativity support and digital fabrication research. We produced novel design technologies. We also developed in combination with that or separate novel fabrication methods, and then focused a lot on the production of artifacts as a means to demonstrate the efficacy of the technologies and the methods. So I want to share a few of those examples, although I want to stress there are limitations, and these don't reveal the entire scope of what we've kind of learned throughout the residency. So one of the really exciting but hard things about this residency is before starting it, there were very few clay-specific digital fabrication design tools. And so most of them rely on a digital fabrication workflow that's really similar to how you would design for plastic 3D printers, where you start by modeling solid geometry, and then you use a general purpose slicing tool to convert that geometry into a series of layers, which then are converted into a set of tool paths for the 3D printer to execute. We noticed that there are a lot of limitations of this process. In part, this limits some of the key features you can have with clay 3D printers, but it also fundamentally was different from how we observed our residents at work. Whereas in a CAD tool, you are defining the geometry first and then kind of engaging with the material later. In ceramics, often you are defining the form in direct response to what the material can do. This is an example of Pilar Wiley at work doing manual coiling. And the decisions Pilar makes about the form she produces are in direct response to the information she's getting from her fingers while she's actively coiling the vessel. So we were interested in understanding how material knowledge can be applied in clay 3D printing, because you're working with the same material, even if you're not always touching it by hand. And one of the spaces there is that you can alter the toolpath of the printer to produce different geometries and surface textures that really take advantage of the unique material properties of the clay. And these images show a design space that we created in exploring toolpath variations with respect to different clay and environmental properties. So this approach of designing with a toolpath, or deciding how the printer is going to move as opposed to designing geometry and slicing it, is called CAM-based design. And it circumvents the use of predefined slicing algorithms to support a wider range of outcomes. But right now, there aren't really tools to directly support this. Most of them are just involved using general purpose symbolic languages. So our objective was to create a CAM-based design system that enables the design and fabrication of forms that harness the material opportunities of clay. The resulting system was a tool we called CoilCam. Samuel Bourgault was the first author on this paper. And CoilCam is a visual coding system that enables the programming of mathematically defined toolpaths to create 3D printed ceramics. We implemented CoilCam initially in Grasshopper. We're currently converting it to a domain-specific system. But for the remainder of the talk, I'll use general purpose icons to explain the key principles. So each of these components matches a custom Grasshopper component that we wrote in Python current time. So programming in CoilCam is structured around procedural transformations of a cylindrical toolpath, which is represented by the toolpath unit generator. This component has 4 shaping parameters: radius, scale, translate, and rotate. And these can all be modified to create different forms and textures with this basic toolpath. Similar to dynamic brushes, to modify the shaping parameter, we use a set of function operators that can be linked together to create increasingly complex functions. So to give it a sense of that, I'll show kind of a work through. This is a basic cup that's starting with a linear function operator on the scale parameter of the toolpath. And this creates a flared cup shape just by modifying that structure. So then to create a protrusion around the surface of the cup, we added a square wave function operator on the radius, which creates this regular offset of the radius of each layer. By adding a step function on the rotation shaping parameter, we now offset each layer rotationally around the center, which creates this protrusion. And then to create a gradient in the texture, we can link a sine function operator to the square wave operator on the radius shaping parameter, which produces this result. So that gives you a basic idea of the design approach. To get things that are not cylindrical, because that's possible in a 3D printer, we can merge or difference any set 2 toolpaths together through Boolean operators that we added to the system. So this enables people to create functional vessels that are not perfectly cylindrical. This is a functional T-set. And this is a range of some of the types of outputs, all glazed or more or less glazed, that are possible with the system. In addition to producing test out artifacts, which I would say all of these are very much so, we built CoilCam in collaboration with our residents, and at the time this was Avi and Pilar. And we evaluated it by applying it to the recreation of signature works from their portfolio. The top is a recreation of a slab-built flask by Avi, and the bottom is the recreation of a hand-coiled vessel by Pilar. And the goal here was not to perfectly recreate these pieces. I want to stress that clay 3D printing is actually very limited compared to what you can do by hand if you're a manually skilled ceramicist. The idea was to understand what the workflow was like in describing the structure and functionality of these pieces and what new opportunities were offered. So this was actually something that came up in the process where Pilar was working with the system with Sam, and they kind of discovered together that they could make these 3D representations of these 2D painted bananas through the toolpath structure. We've had the benefit of enabling successive versions of the residency for us to build on these technologies. So in our second iteration of the residency, we had artists using CoilCam, and we quickly discovered some of the challenges around that space. One kind of obvious challenge is that not all artists always want to work in a symbolic programming language, as I discussed before. So one of the spaces we're looking at right now is enabling the same types of CAM-based design, but through a direct manipulation interface. This is recent work by Devin Frost, where Devin has developed a drawing-based environment for hand drawing toolpaths during clay 3D printing. So you're literally drawing individual toolpaths by hand that will be executed by the printer. The artist can also use computationally defined mechanisms to create more precise geometry. So here's a locking function that lets the artist constrain their layers in some portion of pre-existing layers. The system also has the ability to create the automatic duplication and transformation of layers through symmetrical tools and layer duplication. Which enables some of the same types of numerical precision that is possible with a totally symbolic numerical interface, but with the benefit that you can still add these qualities with hand-drawn, manually varied toolpaths. And the development of a manual drawing system led to very different types of artifacts than what was possible with some of our more numerical approaches. It also notably led to like different contexts for design. So here is our resident Raina during one of our lab meetings designing in Sketchpath rather than paying attention in the meeting. But I think this shows like some of the opportunities in this space. I'll talk briefly about one other project that we did in this area and kind of one of the interesting challenges about clay. So as I mentioned, digital fabrication itself offers this opportunity to bring together the qualities of physical materials and computational methods. And the more we've worked in this space, the more we've realized that it really necessitates understanding the relationship between material and machine processes. And it's as much about the physical world as it is about computational methods to manipulate that space. Clay has been incredibly challenging in this space because it's a particularly dynamic material. It goes through multiple stages in the production process, and each of these stages offers different opportunities and different constraints. So to give an example of some of the challenges, here's just a basic diagram of the shape, the percentage change in the features of this very simple cup as it progresses from wet to leather hard to bone dry to bisque fired. So constantly clay is shrinking until it is finished, changing shape, but also it's not doing this in a uniform manner, which makes it difficult to predict how to precisely design for clay vessels. So one of the spaces that, one of the other challenges of clay is that it changes shape based on how it's worked with. So depending on how you push on a vessel at one point, as the vessel dries and changes shape, that will result in it deforming in relation to that at another point. So that there's a memory to clay is how traditional ceramic artists describe it. We wanted to understand a way in which we could use digital fabrication to work with these dynamic, constantly changing materials. And in a space that we're terming adaptable digital fabrication. And the case study we looked at was computationally supported surface decoration of clay artifacts. So we see a lot of opportunities in this space for computational ceramic surface decoration. The idea was we wanted to support some of the same types of complex outcomes that are possible in manual ceramic surface decoration through procedural methods. But we also wanted to enable people to rapidly produce templates for designing their vessels through parametric template production. And then we wanted to reduce the challenges in fabricating those templates through digital fabrication. So the overarching goal of this project was to enable the rapid design, iteration, and fabrication of stencils for 3D surface decoration. This led to a system that we called CeramWrap, which is an adaptable workflow that extends manual ceramic surface ornamentation with computational fabrication. So the basic idea of CeramWrap is it's a tool for using procedural methods that we've pre-built to design complex patterns for the surface of radially symmetric vessels. The system also contains a unrolling tool, which then takes the results of the design, which is created on a 3D surface, and rolls it into a 2D format that's possible for fabrication. There we go. And one of the key benefits of this parametric structure is not just in speeding up the initial design process, but for enabling rapid iteration as the vessel deforms. So to show a sort of process of generating outcomes from CeramWrap, the first part is the artist can fabricate the vessel, and this can be done either through manual or digital fabrication methods. I want to stress these are things I threw, they're not great. Once the vessel is fabricated and dried, it's possible to model the structure of the vessel. And this is actually pretty easy to do. It's already established in the space of ceramics work, where using basic laser measuring tools, you can quickly model an approximation of a physical vessel. It's possible to use 3D scanning, but it's actually not desirable in the space of 2D fabrication because it presents a really noisy 3D volume representation that is really difficult to transform into something that's physically fabricatable. You can then create a decorative element with the system, create the pattern, and then unroll it, fabricate it with a subtractive tool, which is incredibly fast. So here we're cutting on a laser cutter. We also use a vinyl cutter, and then you apply the resulting template. And the great thing about this process is if there's an error, which often takes place because of deformation and shape change, moving back to the adjustments are largely automated, and it's just a matter of adjusting the metric and then using parametric design to refabricate the resulting template. Then the rest of the process is kind of a traditional workflow. So marking the pattern, in this case, we drilled holes and then created a finished outcome. So drying and firing. These were really rough examples that we created. We created a series of tests. But once again, this is where the benefit of collaborating with professional ceramicists come in. So while we're proud of our tests, we also had the opportunity, to see how the technology could be used in the hands of someone who is extremely skilled in the space of manual ceramics production. So this is Camila Friedman-Gerlich, one of our collaborators, using the technology to design a parametrically patterned Klein base. I think here is the finished version. So this work shows how the integration of precise digital design and fabrication procedures into existing manual craft practices supports these new kinds of outcomes, and also shows how we can design digital fabrication to adapt to dynamic materials using a mixture of manual and computational workflows. It also shows how we can support different types of technical requirements within the same tool, depending on your manual skill. So I want to wrap up just by talking a little bit about the benefits of residencies at an HCI research paradigm. One of the things that I really want to underscore with this work is that none of it would be possible without our residents. And in fact, they're all represented as co-authors on the publications, but most of the technical expertise required to design these computational tools was really rooted in informing our work in the material domain, which came through these residencies. There was also an opportunity for us to engage people from different backgrounds in the development process over many months as essential collaborators. So largely the folks that we were working with are practitioners who have no prior affiliation to computer science or HCI, let alone to working in a formal academic context. Overall, we hope that these residents lead to mutually beneficial outcomes, but this is something that we're actively exploring right now. What are people doing after the residency and how has it impacted their work? That is ongoing work that we're continuing to explore, and I can talk more about that in the discussion. But it's also been a way for us to connect some of our efforts to real-world creative and business practices, specifically by trying to understand not just how the tools we make lead to outcomes that show clear benefits, but what people are making with our technologies and our approaches that connect to the types of products that they're using to make a living. And this is something that, like I said, still requires future research, but it's one of our main focus points. So just returning to my final point, I argued at the start that by understanding traditional makers, we can develop innovative and impactful technologies. And I would say that collaborative partnerships are one powerful method to investigate ways to combine traditional and emerging forms of production. So with that, I'd like to wrap up. I do want to mention all of this work is highly collaborative. So above, you can see all of the current ECL lab members, students, my faculty collaborators, and then our resident artists and alumni within the program. Also many external collaborators. So it's definitely a multi-person effort. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. It's such a great talk that covers all this spectrum of creativity support tool for artists. Actually, on the chat notes, we have many questions, but first I'd like to open the question to the on-site participants, if you want.
Thank you so much for the great talk. I had a question about like research area in general. So you mentioned several times that, so like I think the limitation of the specific languages and systems is that like it enforces some constraints on a user input, right? And I think like you mentioned several times that like you implemented a system, like someone used it, like you found some like edge cases or challenge, like a limitation of the system. And I feel like, you know, any domain specific systems are just like inherently design constrained. And we just like, I guess like my question is that like, are we cursed to like design a new system? Like every time the architecture change or every time like we find like an edge case. And I think you're in a really good position, like because of all the resident artists to so like to make the system that is extensible by artists, not by programmers, because like it's artists who uses the systems. And like I think, you know, if we have to like make a new system every time like artists find some like edge cases or like limitation, and then like, you know, someone else like a programmer or like compiler engineer has to like resolve those constraints, that will like the latency of the feedback is pretty, you know, slow, right? So like my question is like in general, like what were your experience working with like resident artists? Were they able to extend the system itself? Like, do you foresee like any future work that addresses these like design constraint issues? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I guess, so I want to separate out a couple of ways in which systems can constrain people, because I think that's useful in how we think about when and how we develop a new tool. So every system clearly offers constraints. It's like a requirement, otherwise it's not a system or a tool. And there are constraints that are extremely desirable in some cases and in some contexts. So a lot of the work we're doing is active, if I go back, actively trying to impose some of these constraints, like Sketchpath is kind of a great example in this space of because you're drawing by hand, there's just some precision that is fundamentally removed from the tool, and that's a goal. We're also forcing people to engage with some kind of manual effort in this space. Then there are, I would say, constraints that I maybe think more about as like fundamental barriers that either actively prevent a given audience or community from largely making progress with the tool. So often, but not always, general purpose symbolic programming can function in that way. A lot of people we work with are just not going to engage with symbolic programming, although some of them will for sure. But there can also be cases where it's just a thing that will lead people to not, that changes what people envision or ideate with the tool. So dynamic brushes is a good example. If you can create anything in dynamic brushes with a totally symbolic system, it's just harder and not something that the system naturally leans towards. So a lot of our focus is less on how do we're not kind of moving towards the ideal tool, but more presenting different opportunities and alternatives and learning from that process. Even within our residencies, there was days in which some of our residents would want to use Sketchpath one day and then would want to use a different tool that we created another day. And actually something we're still trying to learn how to talk about is we have a lot of kind of like half-baked tools that are just little sketches that don't exist in any published paper yet, but were just like a lot of things we were constantly updating and adding to that facilitated the residency. That sort of were kind of like just-in-time technologies for people to use, but don't actually rise to the level of a standalone system. I don't think there's a single answer to this challenge of how do we address the fact that technologies continually change, community needs are evolving or emerging in different ways. Rather, I would say that's a reality of the work that we do. If I look at digital fabrication as one space, although I think it's true for everything, the clay 3D printers we're going to use in a couple years are going to look nothing like the clay 3D printers we're currently using. That will require changing how people design for them. That's maybe a challenge, but also an opportunity. And so I think the real contribution of our work is the model for investigating and informing and justifying these types of design decisions relative to a given technology in a given community. That's really where I seek to move forward. But I don't see kind of at least our work doesn't focus on trying to ultimately reduce this process of software iteration. And the last thing I want to touch on is you mentioned like the benefit of enabling artists to kind of extend their own tools. I think that is extremely powerful and frankly something that a lot of artists are already doing both in the computational space and in the non-computational space. I mentioned this briefly at the start, but some of the work that we're trying to do going forward is actually directly partnering with researchers and community organizers who are explicitly focused on creative coding technologies for artists, and that looking at like what is their process for enabling artists to take things that they've built and convert them into something that is shareable with a broader community. And I'd say one of the things we want to bring to that is how do we extend that to the physical space, and how do we bring people into that space that have physical material knowledge but are not already coders themselves. So check back with me in a year. Maybe we'll have more results on that work. But thanks for the question.
Thanks very much for a great talk. I really enjoyed that. I have a question about how do you deal with things like authorship and sort of issues related to IPRs and etc. But I think for an author, it's very important that they can say that, oh, well, this is my design. So how does this kind of fit into this cooperation? I think it's great, but just wanted to know, how do you deal with that?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I think I had it on a slide somewhere earlier, but the initial parameters of our residency, and I'll speak specifically to the residency, but I think it expands beyond that. The initial parameters were that residents would retain direct ownership over anything they fabricated. So they kept, and actually I think I have a photo of this, so maybe in a different presentation, but they kept all of the work that they produced. We shipped it, in most cases, we paid to ship it back to their studios. So that was our initial expectation that, and then the other agreement was they would be represented as authors, co-authors in any publications we created, because we're modeling this like a research collaboration, not like a researcher-user relationship. But regarding the authorship, being a co-author on an HCI paper is interesting to some artists. For the most part, it doesn't really give them any professional benefits. So that was much more of a gesture of like trying to explain to our research community how they should think about the contributions of these people, but it doesn't really, yeah, like they don't, our residents like appreciate it. But they don't really care. The part where it gets a little tricky is the software space. So our original plan was to have the software be open sourced for technologies like CoilCam, where there's nothing inherent to it that directly represents the software or the specific technique or ability to directly immediately recreate something that an artist produced. There hasn't been an issue with that. This lighting piece, we did develop a software tool. So this is a piece that Pilar Wiley created in our residency, and it's a 3D printed recreation of a type of product that is kind of a core to her business process. And we built a parametric software tool to model variations of this product. We are not going to open source the software for this. That was a discussion we had with Pilar about it. And even though it's unlikely that someone could still use it to produce the same kind of outcomes, because it still does require a lot of manual skill, like I can't use it to make this, it felt like that was something that was a direct representation of a proprietary practice of hers. So we made that decision in dialogue with her to do that. There will likely be other challenges in that space. And so this is kind of the model we use for the residency is we set up an expectations document, and then we outline opportunities to discuss, like everything is up for discussion around ownership, because the trust and relationship with the community is really the most critical part of this research. And there is risk in that space. I think there's a broader question around what does it mean to do creativity support research that is inspired and informed by artist practice. And the risk there in part is that we are taking knowledge, that it can be an extractive process, that we can take knowledge from an art community and then recontextualize it as new knowledge in an HCI research community. And while there might not be like direct immediate harm to the art community, it's still something where you're taking that knowledge and kind of decontextualizing it, and there's not a mutual benefit there. I would say the surface decoration work is a really important example in that space, where Camila is a co-author. Her work, her knowledge was like, we wouldn't be able to build this this approach without her technical knowledge. In this case, like we brought her to the conference with us, actually. I don't know if that changes something, but I think this is something we're still trying to understand of like, how are there other methods of mutual benefit when we're taking this and arguably benefiting our community, and then maybe benefiting individual artists, but trying to expand it. One other thing that we've tried to do in this regard is have other mechanisms of larger artist community engagement in our work as a part of the work. So this is an image from, we ran these business development workshops. One of our collaborators, PIs on the grant, is a economist who focuses on low volume craft production and value production in that space. And so we've run larger workshops with communities of ceramic practitioners where he's really working them through like strategies for marketing their work. It's kind of a separate research component from what we're doing, but it's an initial effort to try to extend some of our work more into a non-HCI community and more into an arts community. So it's a great question. I'd love to talk more about this challenge.
Okay, so please go ahead. Who is next?
Hey, thank you so much for super interesting presentation. And I wanted to continue on the topic of ownership because you're talking about like the artist's ownership from the artist's point of view, but developing the tool, you must feel an ownership as well. Like even if it's not a like legal ownership, but like certain things are made possible by the tool. And depending on like, I imagine if it's like a very non-complex tool, like even if two artists use this tool, the output is going to look sort of the same, but you need to kind of build in enough functionality or enough expressive potential in the tool so that the output from two artists will reflect their different styles. So I think that also has to do with, you know, if it's the ownership or the stylist of the person developing the tool or of the actual artist. I don't know if you have some reflections on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think a lot of it relates less to like ownership and more notions of values. So I like to believe that there's a consistent like value set expressed to the technologies we build because the other thing I want to stress is that at this point, my PhD students are the ones who are authoring the tools, and I have an overarching objective and a lot of influence in shaping them in most cases, although there are some things that they built that I didn't think would work initially, and then they did. So I like when that happens too. But yeah, I mean, often the paper is in terms of our ownership, the manifestation of that, because it's our justification of our philosophy of why this tool should exist. I would get frustrated if, and there are a few things we're building that have attracted some commercial interest, which we're excited to pursue because it offers another way to get this into broader use, like a broader range of use. But I think the main ownership we care about is sort of the ideas around what do you get when you push back on this notion that digital fabrication is largely about automation and precision, and that there are other ways to engage with it. So that's where, yeah, the software is much more of like an exemplar of that idea than like the point itself. I don't know if that totally answers your question, but
I think it does. Like, yeah, your focus is on the kind of intellectual idea of the program is kind of what you feel, yeah, that most ownership of. That makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead. It's great to have many questions.
Sorry, my question is so simple. I thought you were an artist, but your output is always collaboration work. So, what is your research motivation? Maybe education or supporting? Because I'm also the researcher of the area of digital fabrication, but my motivation is kind of the output. I want to make something. So I develop the tools or the research material, but your case is really opposite. So I'm wondering your research motivation.
yeah, a really basic level, I want people to be able to make a living through physical production. And I see digital fabrication as a possible support tool in that space. So there's a lot of limitations around that. So I would say like that's with a lot of this work, our basic motivation is craft is a really exciting economic space. And we think computational tools and digital fabrication in particular maybe offer exciting opportunities for people to make and sell things. More broadly, like at a more philosophical level, I think physical making or physical engagement in the creative process is part of what makes us human. Not to be like too expansive, but I really believe that like we just get a lot of enjoyment out of it. And so I personally see a lot of benefit to developing new ways to let people engage in physical expression in the creative process.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Well, I'm looking at the online questions. Yeah, some of them are like technical that could be answered afterwards. And also general questions could be touched in the panel discussion. So let me insert one casual question. I really love the quotes in your presentation slides. Some of them seem to come from your previous work that interviews the artists, which is also great. But where are those quotes coming from? Like,
a lot of them are from a paper that I wrote with Sonia Hashem and Jingyi Lee called "What We Can Learn from Artists About Software Development." Sorry. And I think many of them are in that paper, which is a sort of a synthesis of around 5 years of interviews with artists largely working in the visual space. And then we have another paper we're working on. There are some quotes that are from our recent paper that I mentioned in collaboration with Nadia Peak at the University of Washington. So that'll be formally presented at CHI this year. But we have another, I didn't mention this, but another part of the residency was a programmism. In advance of that, we conducted interviews with like 30 ceramics practitioners, both in New Mexico and in California. And so that's work we're still working on getting out in some form, but hopefully to be disseminated in some way in the future.
Yeah, it's really great to hear those artists' voice within these, research presentation. So okay, now I kind of synthesize one question from the online audiences, which is, so in your talk, you use the terminology, the computational tool, and the online question. So the participant is interested in do you have the distinction between computational versus procedural versus, machine learning based?
Yeah, I would distinguish between machine learning based, like probabilistic, and procedural, or like it's not a hard distinction, but I would feel like there's some meaningful distinction describing more explicitly, imperatively, or declaratively the series of operations versus defining at a higher level an objective. And then, sorry, the question of like distinguishing between computational and machine learning based and procedural. I think computation is something that encompasses all of those spaces. So far our work has not relied on machine learning technologies, and a large reason for that is the work we're doing in digital fabrication at the level of machine behavior control. Although there is really remarkable generative design research targeted for material and form-specific fabrication approaches. For a lot of the work we're doing at the level of path planning for the machine, and also working with variable materials, these mapping the data sets for the types of materials and technologies we're using. Yeah, they're in a very different place. So it doesn't mean that we're not excited about that space. And I know this wasn't the question, but I would say that that I I don't exclude machine learning from my overarching definition of computational fabrication. It just hasn't been something we focused on so far.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So let's conclude this session, and then we will have 5 minutes of break, and we will resume at 2:40. So thank you so much, Jeff. I think we are good to go, I guess. So next, I would like to introduce Koya Narumi, who is the project assistant professor at the University of Tokyo, where he combines computational design and digital fabrication to achieve unique products that he will introduce in his presentation, I'm pretty sure. He actively applies his research results to industry, design, and art, which are actually also the great examples of turning research outcome into practice in the wild. So please go ahead. Thanks so much.
Hi, thanks for the introduction, and hi everyone. I'm Koya. I'm doing an assistant professor in the University of Tokyo, and today I'm thrilled or afraid to give a talk after Jennifer entitled with Working with People in the Wild, but I don't know the definition of the in the wild, but anyway, I'm gonna talk with this title. So before tackling into the topic, let me self-introduce myself. So I'm Koya, and I actually, when I entered the university, I was actually specializing in law or history, and somehow I changed my mind, and maybe went to totally different topics of electrical engineering. And I was also staying in Carnegie Mellon University when I was a PhD student, and somehow I'm doing an assistant professor right now. And my topic is, roughly speaking, human-computer interaction, and more specifically, computational fabrication or material interaction. And Jennifer is also working on the computational fabrication, so we share something with you. And in short, my topic is I distribute special materials and structures, and also design extended objects like clothes we wear or products we sit, or food we eat, or mobility devices we ride on. And I also fabricate them using our digital fabrication tools like 3D printers or laser cutters to achieve some novel user experiences. And this is a list of what I did in the past, although I didn't talk about everything here. But for example, I usually submit to Kai or UbiComp, or I also sometimes submit to ICRA robotic conferences or some media art festival like Ars Electronica. But today's topic is not about each topic. So today's topic is about working with people in the wild. But before going into the detail, maybe as an introduction, I'm going to talk about computational fabrication and material interaction. So first of all, what is computational fabrication? Although Jennifer also had her own definition, but for me, computational fabrication might refer the summation of computational design and digital fabrication. So as for the computational design, Yuki Koyama, just behind the camera, has a really great explanation. So usually we design something depending on our feeling, but what if we, instead of we, but the computer can design it by some optimization problem. So it is usually defined as a computational design. And in addition to computational design, we use the digital fabrication tools like a 3D printer. So in that sense, computational fabrication might refer to fabrication of computationally designed object, but under constraint by real tools and materials or some structures. And by the way, this is a reference to the computational fabrication. Do you know this book, Computational Fabrication? Although this is in Japanese, I think this is one of the greatest references to the computational fabrication. And there is another website or maybe talk seminar series called Computational Fabrication Seminar. So if you are interested in this kind of direction, please refer to them. And I'm gonna also explain about the material interaction, but before defining material interaction, this is a really short summary of the history of human-computer interaction. So in short, history of human-computer interaction is the history of interfaces between humans and computers. So historically, people use character user interfaces mediated by the language. And now I'm watching the screen of the graphical user interfaces, which uses a 2D shape as a translator or maybe some interfaces. And up to 2006, people started to use touch interfaces using a haptics as a media. But so this means the history of human-computer interaction are always human versus computer with some interface in between. So this is the history. But recently, a lot of people start to work on material interaction regardless of they call it as a material interaction. But there are so many HCI research going on without computer, I mean. So there are only two entities. One is human and the other is the physical objects. So there is no computer, but the material can interact with human via some material properties like shape change or color change or stiffness change or phase change. So where is a computer? Actually, we embed such kind of material properties using a computer, using a computational fabrication. So this is a relationship between the material interaction and the computational fabrication. So this is why there are so many papers recently without any computational aspect on the surface, but the computer is just inside. So I usually work on computational fabrication, which means the fabrication of computationally designed objects under real-world constraints, and also material interaction, that is the interaction between humans and objects with other computers via material properties. So in this talk, I try to talk about the people in the wild. So who are the people in the wild? So in my case, the people in the wild refer to users or companies or designers or your future colleagues. So this is actually the takeaway of this talk. So what I found in the wild, I learned about the problem solving aspect, or I also found some benefits of visualization, or I also found new possibilities through the collaboration with other people in the wild. And the last one is also the collaboration. So maybe I'm gonna talk about each aspect of these four properties through these five research activities. So I'm going to start by the first project called Circuit Eraser and Conductor. By the way, I did this work when I was a bachelor course, so I kind of feel embarrassed about this. Yeah, but anyway, please forgive me. So in 2014, there was a kind of trend of rapid fabrication of electronic circuit. So for example, my advisor, Kawahara, printed the circuit using a really small and a cheap inkjet printer, or some other people use a sticker or a copper tape or a conductive tag to achieve an electric circuit. But along them, my favorite way of making a circuit is a conductive ink pen. So if you use a conductive ink pen, you can easily draw your circuit as if you draw a picture by yourself using a normal pen. So by the way, this is the AIST pen. And AIST is a startup company from our lab. And maybe as you can see, using an AIST pen, it is really easy to draw your own circuit just in a second. Yeah, now you can see the LEDs lighting up. So using this kind of pen, I did a lot of workshops when I was a bachelor course. And actually there are so many problems happening in the actual workshops, especially with novices. And the biggest one is there is no chance for trial and error. So this is the actual circuit drawn by some novice users. So you can see this is a Yokai Watches animation, which is up to now super old. But anyway, people usually start by drawing the normal picture without the circuitry. And once they complete the drawing, they start to write the conductive circuit. but people usually make a mistake about writing a conductive circuit. Then the whole paper must be thrown away. This is really stressful. So anyway, trial and error are inevitable, especially for novices. So as a solution, I invented a kind of eraser for circuitry as well. So as you can see, I'm erasing the circuit with something hidden inside my hand. Actually, this is a melamine sponge. So the solution is really simple. I just use ethanol to erase the circuitry. And as you can see, we can erase the circuit and also redraw the circuit on the same place you erased. And after some publications, somehow circuit eraser was commercialized and as a pen. So first of all, I invented the eraser as a sponge, as a form, but later on, this eraser became a pen, erasable pen. So as you can see, you can also erase the circuitry using this erasable pen. And I don't know why, but our tools are still on market. So if you're interested in this marker or eraser, maybe please refer to this link. So even after we invented the eraser, there were still several problems. The most typical one is there are no tools for detecting errors. Even though we can erase the circuitry, typically people have no knowledge to modify the circuit, or people don't have access to tools to analyze the circuit. This is why there is a demand for a tool to recognize, analyze, and modify the circuit with some pervasive devices. And this is another solution to this problem. So although it is really hard to see, but currently blue LED is not lighting up due to the high resistance of the conductive traces, then I use the iPad to take a photo of the paper circuitry. And so if you hover from one place to the other, now the system automatically calculates the resistance between them. Oh, by the way, the number is really crazy, 6.34139. This is the mistake of the bachelor students, so just forget about it. So anyway, this is really useful. So the implementation is really simple. What I did is just divide the input image into the small unit resistance and conducted a finite element method to approximate the circuitry. And for example, if you want to change the width of the circuitry, I just replaced all the LEDs into the current source and then try to suggest a better line width. So although I don't talk about the detail of the implementation, but this is the typical result, although this is printed circuit, not the hand-drawn circuit. But as you can see, in the initial design, blue LED is not lighting at all. But after the modification of the line width, you can see almost all the LEDs are lighting in the same intensity. So as you saw, there are two problems. One problem is there is no chance for trial and error. And as a solution, I invented a circuit eraser. And there was another issue of no tools for detecting errors. And this is the why we invented conductor, which won the honorable mention award in UbiComp. So maybe this is a takeaway for the circuit eraser and conductor. So in my bachelor course, I luckily had a chance to play with the company product, but even with the company product, users do have so many problems, and maybe just picking them up could be a reason to write a paper, and maybe you can just write a lot of papers just by finding issues and solving it. So the next topic is liquid pouch motors, which is about the robot or actuators. So this is a really thin, lightweight, and flexible actuators for paper interfaces. So as you can see, now I'm putting the liquid pouch motors on the cup filled with the hot water. So you can see the liquid pouch motors tries to flip even without any wiring. So the principle is really simple. We prepare a pouch that is typically used for sashimi or sushi, but instead of soy sauce, we use the low boiling point liquid called Novix 7000 that can evaporate at 34 degrees Celsius. And if you heat the pouch up, then the liquid evaporates and the whole body changes its shape. So although it's really simple, we can achieve both angular motion and also linear motion. And although it looks super fragile, it is not fragile. For example, in this case, pouch is only 3 grams, but can still lift up 3 kilograms. So this is, yeah, interesting. And another interesting aspect of liquid pouch motor is the fabrication method. Yeah, the figure is so small. So if you want to prototype any shape, you can use a CNC soldering iron to fuse two different plastic film. So if you import the design from Illustrator, for example, you can make any shape of planar structure. Or if you want to make a really large number of pouches at the same time, we can first of all inject a liquid and then heat seal each of them using like a one to one, like a conveyor-based process. And as a typical application, we first of all explore the printable paper robot because, printable circuit is already super ubiquitous in the small community of Ubicon for maybe HCI. So I thought that if we can print the motors combined with printable heaters or wiring or sensors, we can make a functional robot with just two printing process. So this is an example of the fly trap. So if you touch the fly trap, it tries to capture your fingers. And usually, in order to make this kind of robot, we need to buy motors, heaters, touch sensors, wirings, and we need to go to maybe Akihabara to buy them. But in this case, there are only two printing processes required just to achieve this kind of functional system. So these examples are all powered by the electric heaters. But we thought that it is perhaps possible to drive pouch motors without any power source. I mean, can it be intellectual wallpaper? So this is the invention of Papillon, which came from the pavilion and papillon. I'm not sure how long I'm gonna spend for my talk. So, as you can see, there are so many butterflies on the surface, and each of which can change its shape due to the temperature or light. So we exhibited this work in Ars Electronica in Austria, and inside of Papillon, there are so many children playing. And if you look at the ceiling, the light is cast on the limited surface of the ceiling, and you can see some of the parts are flipping its wings. So the point is, this facade can open windows when it is hot, because if it's hot, we want to open the windows, right? And it can close them when it is cold. And the whole body is driven by the ambient heat and light. And it is also completely wireless. So assuming that we try to make this using a really normal rigid actuators, we need at least more than 1,000 of wirings. And then the total appearance should be really messy. And another merit is it's totally replaceable, or it is mass producible, or it is translucent, which are all really difficult with the really conventional motors. And after this exhibition, we collaborated with the fashion brand Unreal Age to achieve, morphing dress. Okay, let's see the video. So we exhibited this work in Roppongi Hills Mori Museum. And there are two functions. One is the color changing property. So usually the dress looks like the white one in the left, but if you cast a light from external environment, it can reflect the light and change its color using a retroreflective phenomena. And for each corsage, there is a Peltier devices embedded inside, and it imitates the body temperature of the human, and the whole corsage tries to close or opens, repeatedly. Because this exhibition lasts for 3 months, that is why I couldn't do as a model of this dress, but the whole body was, done by Peltier devices. So for this, exhibition Alive and Live, the concept was everything flows dress. So usually our clothes does not respond to human or any environment, but this dress can change its texture by the inner temperature, or it can also change its color by the outer light. So maybe the takeaway from this project is working with designers or companies visualizes your work 100 times better, because this is totally what I can't do. Yeah, I don't know. Okay. So the next project is Poimo. Oh, by the way, there is an actual Poimo in the front. Maybe you can change the direction of the camera. So this is the mobility devices, but made from a balloon. So maybe you felt that today from the Gokokuji station to here, it was really hard to walk because there is a really large hill. But if you use a Poimo, you can take it from the backpack and just inflate to make it a larger body, and you can enjoy riding. And because the whole body is made from the balloon, it is really soft and lightweight and inflatable. And as I said, inflatability allows for both storage and a human scale form factors. And you may think that this is so fragile. And by the way, this morning I saw a Facebook post talking about Poimo, and there are so many comments saying, this looks so fragile, don't ride on it, it's so dangerous. But actually, this is not dangerous or fragile. From the special materials called drop stitch fabric. So this is really similar to the normal balloon, but inside of the balloon, there are so many strings. So usually if you inflate the balloon, it all goes to a sphere shape. But thanks to these strings, it can sustain its board shape, even if you apply really high pressure. And it is also really easily customizable and lightweight, but still super durable. So in the previous Poimo, our concept was focusing on inflatability, but in the second version of Poimo, we focused more on the inclusiveness or personalized design and fabrication. So this is the second version of Poimo we published to VIST. So for this one, we designed a GUI system that can customize the shape of each Poimo. So first of all, in front of that laptop, you use a stool or some bars, I don't know, whatever bars to take a posture of your riding for motorcycles, for example, and then a system automatically suggests the skeleton of your body and suggests the suitable shape that does not, for example, rotate after you ride on it. And you can also customize your own Poimo shape under the constraints of some mathematical parameters. And after finishing the design process, the Korean company can make your own Poimo for yourself, and you can assemble it by yourself and maybe start locomotion. Yeah, to be honest, this one is really hard to ride, but maybe you can enjoy the actual riding experiences of Poimo without the customization. But anyway, this is customizable and inclusive Poimo. And we actually tried a lot of demo experiences. For example, this is the demo in Sekai Marumie. Although this girl didn't practice it more than 5 minutes, she can write it on really well. And Bito Takeshi only practiced writing for 30 seconds or something. He could somehow write on it. And I also did a trial test with more than 100 people in front of the Kashima Stadium. And as you can see, even children can enjoy writing. And this is another video we took in some exhibition.
This man discovered Poimo online and decided to come see for himself.
I live with a disability. The wheelchair is convenient but heavy. It's difficult for me to get in a car or board a plane. But a vehicle that's inflatable and can be folded while traveling, I'm very interested in it.
In this interview, although he just mentioned about the lightweight or soft property of the Poimo, but I also think that this optimistic design can contribute to the inclusiveness. For example, if I ride on a wheelchair, it seems like I was injured or I had some disability. But if I ride on a Poimo, it looks like I'm just taking a break, or maybe I'm just riding on a sofa. So maybe in the future, if everyone rides on the Poimo, it can contribute to the inclusiveness regardless of the disability. Maybe the takeaway from the Poimo project is working with users, specify what kind of possibility your work would have. Because before this exhibition, I didn't imagine that this kind of mobility devices can contribute to the disability or inclusiveness. Okay, the next project is about Crane. So this is the origami design software we worked together with Nature Architects Inc. So as you know, or as you may not know, a lot of HCI people love origami fabrication. For example, Stephanie Mueller in MIT worked on the laser cutter to achieve an origami-like structure. And later on, there are so many origami-related work, like sensing or self-folding or robotics or fabrication and so on. But to be honest, origami design has much more to do. So for example, if you look at the space engineering, this structure called Flasher is much more complicated than what HCI people design. Or if you look at the garments, this origami has so many edges or so many faces. And in the most extreme cases, mathematician can design any shape from a piece of a sheet of paper. So more sophisticated origami design is required in engineering industry and mathematics. So if you go beyond the HCI, there are so many possibilities available. So in order to design such kind of complex origami structure, as an example, this is a question: can we easily make this kind of structure? I mean, the chair or the table. So at the first glance, these origami products seem so simple, but in reality, these are both so difficult to achieve. For example, in case of the chair, this chair must fold from a flat sheet, which corresponds with the mathematical constraints of developability. Or in case of this table must fold into a flat sheet. This leads to a different constraint of flat foldability. And as a product, these must satisfy the aesthetics and functions. That means symmetry. Or, as you know, these are made from a wooden board, which is totally different from the paper. So you cannot basically fold a paper crane using this kind of board because it has to satisfy rigid foldability. And even if you succeed in folding some kind of structure using a paper, in the actual origami products, there is always some thickness. So to accommodate the thickness, we also have to care about the fabricability of the whole structure. So in short, this is difficult. So that is why we made Crane. This is an integrated computational design platform that can satisfy functional, foldable, and fabricable origami products. So the main GUI is implemented onto the Rhino Grasshopper. So on the left, there are several visual programming languages, and on the right, you can see the results in the CAD visualizer. So now, if you connect the solver component, you can see the whole structure can fall into the 3D structure. And in the back side of the CAD visualizer, there are several components. So although it looks super complicated, the basic components are divided into 4. The first one is the input, and then we also put some constraints for functionality and foldability. And this integrated solver conduct a simulation and a form finding. And after you complete the origami design, you can calculate the thickness and required hinge structure for the desired tools. So let's see from the input. So there are so many input options available in Crane, but in this case, this guy tries to prototype a chair, origami chair. So origami designer usually starts by folding a paper to prototype something. So after folding the paper, you can draw red and blue and green lines to make a graph of the origami structure. And if you take a photo using a smartphone, for example, the whole system can take them as an input of the graph structure. And after that, the system can simulate the folding transformation of the prototyped origami chair. But as you can see, this is really versed as a chair. This is not chair. because it is not, first of all, symmetric, and edges are floating from the ground. And most importantly, seat is not horizontal, or backrest leans too much to the back, and two edges on the back do not touch each other. So this is really versed design of the chair. So in this case, we do not do a manual modification, but the system can automatically modify the structure using a constraints. So for example, there are several constraints. So for example, on plane constrain 3 or more vertices on the same plane. And likewise, we put this kind of constraint components in the Grasshopper components, and these are connected to the solver components. So in the next video, everything will be fixed really soon. So maybe you should watch the video really carefully. So first of all, the chair is really bad, but you can see now the whole problems are solved at the time. And even after the form finding, you can drag the vertices to keep design process under the constraints. So maybe you can see, the whole structure is fixed really soon. And after you finish the design, we go to the fabrication phase. So depending on the fabrication phase, we can use different type of hinge structures. And if you choose one of them, the system assigns hinge structures considering the thickness, folding angle, and the fabrication tools. So for example, this is the box joints suitable for CNC milling machine and suitable for the real scale furniture prototyping, or the same model can be used for making a prototyping structure fabricable with a 3D printer. So maybe you can first of all check the whole structure using a 3D printer and then proceed to the larger fabrication using a CNC. So there are several other functions of Crane. For example, not only the manual design, Crane can also automatically assign the tessellation pattern between two parallel surfaces. So if you give two offset surfaces, the system can automatically assign the repeated structure. So using this kind of design, for example, we can make a lampshade, or in this case, maybe it looks more like a vase as you introduced. So in this case, the whole pattern was automatically generated from the offset surfaces, and a shape also satisfies rotational symmetry, although I didn't explain at all. And the system can also generate a really complex structure from a given polyhedral mesh. And as I explain later, we can use any 3D mesh actually to generate this kind of structure. So for example, if you use this function, you can make your own mask. So given the 3D mesh of your face, the system can generate a mask that can fit your face. And there are so many surface areas that contributes to more breathability. And by the way, when I submit this work to Tokai, one reviewer said, yeah, even though the COVID is really pandemic, you don't have to show the mask application as an example. But we were really serious about this because the surface area is really large and we thought this is the best application we can show at that time. Okay, anyway, so this is not the end of the Crane presentation, and we collaborated with the Issey Miyake Epoch Able as an application in the wild, maybe. So this is the jacket we designed with our software Crane, and there is something behind it.
This project was born from our cutting-edge design technology integrated with Epoch Able Issey Miyake's manufacturing process. Together we explored the limits of garments made from one piece of cloth. By integrating computational design with the technology of steam stretch, a program automatically designs a pattern that meets the designer's ideal form for a garment. It also allows us to make organic shapes that cannot be made just by piecing fabric together. We developed this technology, and this jacket is an example of what it is capable of.
So in April this year, we were in Milan, Italy, and this is the branch of Issey Miyake in Milan, and we exhibited this jacket. And surprisingly, this jacket is folded from a sheet of fabric. And using the steam stretch technique of Issey Miyake, the whole garment is folded at once if you apply the heat, in this case, steam. So only the selected strings can shrink by heat, and by computationally designing the shrinkable threads and non-shrinkable threads, we can design a really foldable structure using Crane. So conventionally, there is only one great designer in Issey Miyake who can predict the final shape of the origami structure from the 2D shape, but it is totally impossible for us to imitate this kind of design process. So what we did with Crane is totally inverse. Given a 3D mesh, we can predict the 2D shape that can fold back into the 3D shape. So in this case, what you need to do is just prepare for the 3D model for your jacket, which is much more easy than preparing the 2D shape that can fold into the 3D shape. And we exhibited a dress or some geometrical shape like a sphere. And there were several guests coming to the branch, and it was a really nice experience for me. And this is the slide I put in the Kai presentation. So there are many fabrication papers published in Kai every year, but we are proud of our paper applied to the real design and the industry. This looks really arrogant, but at the time I was believing this. Yeah, this is true. Okay. So, okay, this is a conclusion. Crane is a seamless design platform for design and fabrication of origami product that can allow for input simulation and form finding and thickening process. And by the way, Crane is open source, and you can just download the plugin from Food for Rhino, or you can also refer to the source code in GitHub. Oh, by the way, why I put this slide? But yeah. Usually I don't talk about this slide, but before publishing this paper to Tokai, we actually did a workshop. And what I felt at that time is this workshop is not for validation of how good it is, but we just wanted to modify some of the functions given, with the feedback given from the audience. So I'm not sure how this kind of things should be evaluated in a Kai publication. usually people say we evaluate this kind of workshop, but actually I'm not sure about it. Maybe this is one of the discussion topic. But anyway, so the takeaway is the wild is a place to meet super talented colleagues outside of the lab. In this case, almost all the software was designed by Kaisto in the Nature Architect Inc. And only the people in the lab, it was totally impossible to achieve this kind of interesting work. So the last topic is also about origami, but origami fabrication, not origami design. So this is called inkjet 4D print. And as you can see, now I'm printing something flat. And if you put this inside of the hot water, it will automatically change its shape to form a cap in this case. There is another person also, Koyama-san here. So as an introduction, any polyhedron is foldable from a sheet of paper, which was first of all proposed by Tachi in 2007. So as you can see on the left, if you give the 3D polyhedron, it can be automatically flattened into the 2D structure. And this phenomena is mathematically proved by Domen and Tachi in 2017. So any polyhedron is foldable, which is super great. But origami takes so long time for fabrication. So although software generates the pattern in seconds, but folding the bunny in this case takes 10 hours and typically takes more than 10 hours. So which prohibits the actual application of the origami to the industry. So how can we automate this process? Maybe one of the possible solution is 4D printing for self-folding. So this is one of the prior work by Lin Yao in 2018. So they used the FDM 3D printer to extrude the thermoplastics. And after that, they put them inside of the hot water and the thermoplastic is distorted by the heat to change its shape into the 3D structure. Yeah, this is also great. But the problem is 4D printing, conventional 4D printing is not enough for origami crazy people. For example, in the prior 4D printing, they approximated the bunny into 26 facets, but I can fold 26 facets faster than FDM 3D printer. Then who cares? So rather than that, what origami researchers want is the automated folding process of a crazy, insane number of facets. So how can we achieve this? So we used an inkjet UV printer to achieve this, which is called inkjet 4D print. So as you can see, now I'm pouring the hot water to change the shape of the Romresh pattern. Oh, by the way, this is the simplest structure I'm showing in this slide, but this is already one of the most difficult self-foldable structures in the history, I think. Yeah, so first of all, we prepare the heat shrinkable film or any heat shrinkable materials as a substrate. And on both sides of a substrate, we print origami structures like a mountain fold and a valley fold. And if you pour the hot water, it can change its shape into the 3D structure. So this is the basic principle. First of all, there is a heat shrinkable substrate in the middle, which is sandwiched by the ink layers. And if you apply some heat uniformly, only the places exposed to the air can shrink, but the ink layer resists its shrinkage. And if you change the width of the gap, you can linearly control the folding angle as well. So one unique aspect of inkjet 4D print is it can also print color as well as a shape. So as you saw, most of the examples I have is black, but if you need a color, we can just add the layer of white and a color. So for example, this is the example of Earth. So in case of the normal printer, we usually use the printer for color, and we use the 3D printer for shape. But in this case, we can print both color and the shape in the one process. And yeah, there is software and design examples here. So this is almost the same slide as I showed in the previous one. So the whole system is implemented in Crane. So there is nothing to talk about it. So in case of the forward design, we start by designing the suitable favorite origami structure. For example, if you think you want to fold a structure at this folding angle, you can add the component to generate the printing pattern for inkjet 4D print. So the red one corresponds to the front pattern, and the blue one corresponds with the back pattern, for example. And using this method, we can make a lot of origami tessellations. And if origami professors look at this slide, a lot of people say, wow, but maybe you guys don't say wow. But anyway, these are really famous. For example, Yoshimura patterns are usually used for the can of Chuhai. I don't know how to say. So, but the important thing is everyone is not the specialist of origami, but in such a case, we can use the inverse design. So we can input the 3D mesh, and then the system automatically origamize the whole structure. And then likewise, we can generate the printing pattern. And in this case, the final pattern is much, much more crazier than before. So using this inverse design method, we succeeded in making a bunny which has more than 4,000 facets, or we also made a cap which has about 3,400 facets. So maybe I can briefly explain about the evaluation. So how small can we make this? So as the metrics, I use the length of the triangle, and as a result, we succeeded in self-folding the structure with 3 millimeters in length, which is, of course, more than human beings can do. And as a comparison, as I said in the previous work, the maximum number of facets for bunny was 26, but for this time, we succeeded in folding a bunny with 4,000 facets, which has more than 150 times than ever. And as a maximum, we succeeded in folding 80,000 facets. And yeah, this is the result we used when we use the A2 size printer. So we can increase the number if we use a larger printer. Oh, by the way, you guys are wondering why we do this. So this is a slide to explain the merit of 4D printing. So for example, if you want a 3D printer rolls like this, if you use a traditional FDM 3D printing, in addition to the real structure, we also need a supporting material, which must be wasted after fabrication. But in case of 4D printing, we do not need any supporting materials. And as for the printing time, in the 3D printing process, it took about 9 hours, but in our case, just less than 30 minutes. And we brought this kind of sample to San Francisco or so many places, so many times, but these were all super easy because this is just like a pile of documents. Yeah, okay. So finally, I'm gonna talk about the applications. First of all, as I said, it is not limited to the plastic film, but we can also, for example, use a shrinkable fabric as a substrate. So we use the polyester to make this dress, and this cap is also, this cap was made with plastic film. But anyway, inkjet 4D print achieves really complex shape and colors. And another benefit is, for example, if Jennifer likes the red dress, I can print in red. And if I like a black dress, maybe I can print it just in black. And we do not need any replacement of the whole system. And another example is a ship in a bottle to explain the self-assembly process of the inkjet 4D print. But maybe I made a mistake. This is not a good example of self-assembly process. Yeah, because a lot of people hope to self-fold this kind of structure in space or maybe in the disaster, but this is really peaceful. Okay. So the last example is the interactive postcard. Because the whole body is really flexible and thin, we can use it as a postcard. For example, when this guy receives the postcard, first of all, she has no idea what it is. But after pouring the hot water, it says happy birthday to you. So inkjet 4D print can work as an interactive and encrypted message. So as a conclusion, inkjet 4D print enables self-folding of super complex origami patterns, and we can achieve both known and free-form origami shapes, and we can optionally achieve color, texture, as well as shapes, all in one process. So we published this work in this August, and after that, there was so many media coverage. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, for example, this is a CNN coverage. And maybe I can do the live demo of this video later on in this building. So, oh, by the way, there is no takeaway for this project because this project is not completed yet. By the way, I happened to find my news in taxi. When I was riding on a taxi, it was super lucky. But anyway, our latest work in the wild will show up in February, so maybe I can make some takeaway at that time. So this is a conclusion of the whole topic. So the title was about working with people in the wild. And yeah, throughout 5 different research topics, I think I could explain the people in the wild. For example, it includes users or companies or designers or your future colleagues. And maybe in the wild, we can learn the problem-solving aspect. For example, just picking up users' issues could be a reason to write a paper, or visualization. Designers and companies visualize your work much better than yourself, unless you're a designer. And yeah, you can find a new possibility of your work if you collaborate with someone else. And the wild is a place to meet super talented colleagues outside the lab. Okay, so this is the end of my talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now is the time to take questions.
Thank you so much for the amazing talk. This was super interesting. How do you find those collaborators, like designers and artists and like people that you work with?
That is the good question, and I have no idea. But yeah, that is really good question. So as I said in the first project, I collaborated with the company ASIC, which is about the conductive paper circuit. But this is simply due to the lucky situation because this company was founded from our lab. So, but throughout this project, I think I learned how to collaborate with companies. So maybe the initial project was a total luck, but later on I learned. And I don't know, that's a good question. But maybe at least for your first project, maybe you can ask for some help of other people to collaborate with your suitable companies. Yeah, I don't know.
Do you have some high-level insights about like how you, like from what you learned to work with companies?
I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm saying so many times, I don't know. Yeah. Do you guys have any answers to this question? Do you know how to collaborate with companies? Maybe this is a good topic for the discussion as well. Yeah, but so far I have no answer. Sorry.
Thank you so much. I've seen some of these projects before, but seeing it in this, it was really interesting to see it like all put together like this. And one kind of detailed question that comes to mind And it's this process from Isumiyake of like steam folding the fabric. I know, I suppose that's like a kind of industry process. It's not really like an academic, like published papers. It's difficult to compare to this process, but I'm sure you're knowledgeable about what's going on there. I'm wondering how do they do it? How does that compare to the inkjet for the printing process? Do they use some similar technique? Or is it secret?
So these two projects are totally different because in the Issei Miyake project, they usually use a weaving. Weaving means the threads goes perpendicular way in the perpendicular way, and they embed the heat shrinkable thread at the specialized at the selected part of this thread. And in case of inkjet 4D print, the situation is much more simple because we don't have to care about the direction of the threads. Or for example, if you wanna shrink the threads in this direction, we have to calculate the shrinkage of these two threads in case of the weaving. But in case of the printing, this is not an issue. We can just use any direction. So maybe this is the difference. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have one particular question that I want to pick up from the online audiences, which is, well, your work seems, I mean, I guess many HCI researchers know the power of being in the wild, like solving users' issues or something like that. But your work seems way more in the wild compared to kind of mainstream of HCI research. And so I think it's your intentional choice. I mean, otherwise you can just publish papers, but there is some sort of motivations behind your choices. And what is it? And how do you feel about that?
Yeah. So I actually did a lot of research projects in the past, which are not necessarily related to the work in the wild. For example, in case of self-healing UI, this is a simply visionary project of how, what if we make a self-healable devices for HCI? So which is far from the practical usage or maybe in the wild research. So what is your question? Sorry.
So, okay, now I might be able to rephrase the question. So the original question was, why are you interested in the wild type of research? But now, well, given this, more example of researchers like self-healing UI, it's again the collaboration with the researchers from different disciplines, right?
Yeah.
And so what is it?
So regarding the collaboration, regardless of the discipline, I didn't aim at working together in different disciplines, but HCI by itself includes a lot of disciplines.
Yes.
So not limited to software, not limited to GUI or maybe human factors. Recent HCI includes most of them. For example, people have to visualize the achievement in a really beautiful ways, or people needs to 3D print, not only that in the software. So HCI itself has so many disciplines. So it is not only me who has such kind of things. And another thing is by watching Jennifer's talk, I thought that computational fabrication almost inevitably involves people joining from the wild areas or maybe from different disciplines. And that is why people in the computational fabrication field can work in the wild. So maybe the direction, maybe the logic is totally inverse.
I see.
We don't do the work in the wild, but we do the computational fabrication. And as a result, the achievement goes to the wild, maybe.
I see. Yeah, that's really interesting in the sense that software only HCI research can be only in the computers, but you have these kind of physical representations of what your research is about, and then that connects to the activities in the wild that has happened in the past. and that allows that kind of space for, I would say, external or how to say interdisciplinary people outside of the HCI literature to come in and discuss and collaborate. That's also, yeah, one of the key.
In other words, computational fabrication can enjoy everything. You can play with the computer, you can touch the actual artifacts, you can take a movie. So maybe this is some really interesting field. Everyone can join it.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, that reminds me of, well, actually, it's not only limited to this physical thing because, you know, often HCI and computer graphics researchers are have the figures in the papers, whereas in like programming languages or software engineering, they don't necessarily have figures. Those kind of visual representations already is a kind of message that you know, the outcome is interpretable by a wider variety of people. So thank you for the answer. Any questions from the venue?
Thank you very much for really interesting applications, I would say, or products. How do you do the design? I wonder, like, for instance, the poema that we see here, or things, or how is the kind of origami type design?
Thank
Where
you
does
for
the
your
ideas come from? Or how does it do in practice?
For Poimo, for example, some of the designs are not designed by ourselves, by researchers. So in this case, we collaborated with the design consultant, Takram in Aoyama, to design this shape. So this specific one is not designed by ourselves. But for origami or such kind of things, because to make this kind of origami structures, we didn't manually design them from scratch, but we usually just input a 3D model. So in some sense, we did not design this, but the computer did.
So is it more like trying different, say, functions different ways, and then seeing what comes out? So what is good, what works?
So sorry.
I mean, that I understand that, for instance, with this origami, you said you had special ways to have a certain part of the fabric which contracts in a heat, etc. So how do you sort of design these things? Is it kind of computational problem?
You mean, how did I design that self-foldable origami by printing?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and there is a long history. So before starting the inkjet 4D printing, there is one collaborator, Masaki Sugimoto from Elephantec Ink, said the inkjet printing process might be fashionable in the next 10 years of the fashion design, because a lot of fashion companies started to use inkjet printing to design a really expensive shirt, for example. So if we can make the self-folding process using an inkjet printing process, maybe a lot of companies can adopt such kind of processes in the actual fabrication process. So that is why I started to achieve a self-folding using an inkjet printer instead of other fabrication methods. And first of all, I walked around a lot of companies, printing companies, to find a suitable printer that have a rigidity a little bit to resist to the shrinkage. And then we optimize the layer height. I'm not sure if this kind of answers to your question, but we then next optimize the layer height, which also required almost 1 year. So in total, just folding one piece took 1 year. And then after that year, we spent 2 years to design a really complex structure. together with Koyama-san just there. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. So it's kind of a research in a way, the design.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to pick one more question from the online audience, if there is no venue question. So it's a simple one. The work needed to make research into the level of completion like this, I mean, this series of work, would seem very overwhelming. So how do you manage to handle all these work that's needed? Or is it just that you work so hard?
No, because maybe I just take so long time. For example, in case of Crane, this is not the contribution by myself, but the most of the software design was done by Kaisto, the first author from the Nature Architects Inc. And he started his project in 2018 as a part of Mito project in IPA. So it took almost 4 years to publish this work. And he asked me to work together because he knows how to implement this kind of software, but he doesn't know how to write a paper or how to evaluate a paper or how to do a user study. So maybe the final 1 year was just spent for applications or user studies or evaluations. And as I said, for the inkjet 4D print, it took 3 years, which is much, much, much longer than the usual duration of the HCI work, right? Because we have Kai and West. So in the best case, we work on the project for half a year. But this took 3 years. That is why.
Thank you. That's a wonderful answer. So, is there any question from the venue? I'm thinking of whether I should go into the break or probably one more question from online. What is, well, I just read it. I don't understand it from the right. What is the limitation of developing new material interactions within the research-driven school? How much of the limitation can be resolved by the in the wild approach, and what are the remaining challenges?
So I think I don't work in the wild to solve anything. But I work in the wild because I want to do it. So I'm not sure how to answer that question.
Yeah, so probably you're doing research as a research from the beginning, and then you're applying it later. So that's sort of two-folded step.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
But I would say just starting the project, just before starting the project, I'm always imagining how we can apply such kind of technique to the industry. So maybe in the very first project, I succeeded in taking a patent, for example, for the circuit eraser. And somehow we are still selling this kind of technique. And then I thought that just doing the research, just doing a presentation in Kai is not enough for me. So just before starting the project, we should think about how we can use it for industry.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mhm.
So have you ever gotten any, and I guess maybe specifically for the circuit eraser, but is there ever been any tension with the notion of conducting research on a product which is commercialized and which some of the researchers have a vested commercial interest in? Like I know other researchers who have done in the space of conductive circuit or paper circuit work, the only way for them to get it out in the world was to make it a product. But then there was kind of a discussion around, well, how does this change, say, like the positionality or the incentives of the researcher in assessing that work when it's also something that people are actively buying, and money is changing hands.
So I'm not a founder of this company, so I didn't earn so many money from this work. I just got some patent, from this, but that's a really difficult question. So can you please rephrase the question? So,
Well, I guess, do you think it, and I don't mean to say, like, I see a lot of potential clearly in doing research on products that the researcher has developed. But I guess I'm curious about once something is a product, how it might change your approach or your motivation as a researcher versus something that you have the freedom or the flexibility to know that, like, no one is currently relying on this, or I think people teach with the HCI pen, they use it in classrooms, artists use it. Like, how does that change the constraints or the motivations for how you think about what's possible in that space?
this is the kind of question I don't receive in the conference venue. So yeah, it is maybe I'm gonna just refrain from answering this so far right now.
I feel like you're enjoying the kind of pressure in some sense. I mean, you can stay in the research lab and do research as a researcher, but you intentionally choose to go out of that environment and get involved in this commercial world.
Yeah, I enjoyed it so much, and I sometimes feel that, I'm wondering if the HCI or Kai or VIST is the best place for publication about this kind of research. So yeah, maybe I'm gonna discuss this question in the next session.
Yeah.
But is Kai the best place to do this kind of research? Maybe this is the open question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Thank you. Thank you. I think this is a very good conclusion of this session. So thank you so much, Koya, again. We will have a short break and we will resume at 4 p.m. To start the panel discussion. We are starting the panel discussion session, which is something that I was really looking forward. And officially, this seminar should end at 4:30, but I got a kind of internal approval to extend. So yeah, from Koya, from the venue master, and so we might kind of extend this session for a bit longer. So especially for the on-site attendees, if you have any plans afterwards, please just feel free to leave. But it's really great to have all of you here as part of this panel discussion. And just before going to the panel discussion, I think I need to introduce myself for a bit, because it's me who actually set the theme for this edition of the seminar, which is In the Wild. So let me introduce what In the Wild means for me. I am Jun Kato. I graduated from the University of Tokyo back in 2014. And since then, I am a researcher at National Institute of Advanced Industrial Science and Technology. I also became the technical advisor or a PI at the Research and Development Division under the animation production company called Arch. I have worked on HCI in general, but to be more specific, I would call my research style as a toolsmith, which is a term like, tool. I create tools for somebody else, for somebody who does creative things like programming, music making, video making, and also animation creation, that kind of thing. So I will only touch some of these, probably two of these, musicians and anime directors cases. The first one is Text Live, which was originally published as a research paper at Kai 2015. It's already 8 years ago. And this is the interface. Well, if you choose a song, it automatically generates this kind of music video that synchronizes to music. So there is signal processing thing that is working behind the scene, which is the outcome of my colleague. And what I did is to build this kind of interactive interfaces to author these kind of music videos, so that the novices, any kind of people who are interested in music can enjoy this kind of music video authoring experience. It ended up as a public web service. It's still online. If you navigate to textalive.jp, you can immediately start using this tool. And fortunately, this tool was used in renowned virtual singer Hatsune Miku's live performances multiple times. And also these days, it's used for virtual reality live performances. And it was a kind of surprise to me that TextLive is only capable of making a 2D music video. But then these VR live performances creators, they kind of spotted this sweet spot where they can utilize these videos for their use cases, which I'm pretty happy of. And there are more examples at this website if you're interested. Actually, last week there was a collaboration with the famous animation in Japan, which is Purikyo. There was a Purikyo virtual reality live performance, and this tool was used to author some of the performances, which was really fun. And what's important about this research is, well, while I have demonstrated all these professionally made live performances, this tool is actually more widely used by the amateur musicians and video authors. So this is one prominent example that I found in the wild. So there is a musician called Big Head. I personally know him, but this is the music video that he made by himself. And so he was a musician when I got to know him. And he started using TextLive for his music video authoring. And at the time, it was still a kind of 2D music video. And then while I was developing this tool, he was learning new things. And he started making this kind of 3D music video by himself, which was really amazing. And it's really a kind of joy of being in the wild to collaborate with this kind of talented artist. And also, one interesting outcome of this activities in the wild is that I got to know new communities of researchers. In this particular case, there is Society for Animation Studies, which is the academic society for people in humanities field. And given my ethnographic investigation on the live performances, I could kind of did an oral presentation in this conference this year, which was really interesting. So this kind of, in the wild activities really allowed me to get in touch with a new community of people, which I really enjoy. And also, after I published the paper and deployed the web service of TextLab in the wild, I gradually get more interested in how this technology can be utilized to make a new kind of medium in the future, lyric-driven media in the future. So, lyrics has been enjoyed by lyric sheets and then lyric videos. So the next step is to make it interactive. We released the framework for programmers to allow this kind of interactive lyric-driven musical applications. And technically speaking, the implementation was complete by 2020, but we didn't submit any paper at that time. Instead, we conducted a programming contest with help of the company behind Hatsune Miku. Well, actually, the programming contest itself was held by the company behind Hatsune Miku, and we kind of provided these technologies to enable this programming contest. And it became an annual event. So the paper that we published this year only contained results from 2020 and 2021. The contest is ongoing, 2022 was not in the paper. There was also this year's edition. it's really fascinating to see text like color the creative culture through programming, which is really something that I'm, a big fan of, this kind of activities. So yeah, this is kind of research in the wild that I do in collaboration with companies. Also, I serve as the technical advisor at a small Japanese animation production company. And there is this small research and development team where I collaborate with cultural anthropologist, Hirotaro Mihara. So what we are doing here is to really, to me personally, it's really about learning the process of anime production. It's really complex like this, Now, there is this pre-production process where 10 or 20 people are involved. And then it goes to the production process where hundreds of people are involved. So animation production is really laborsome. There are so many people involved, and they have very diverse roles within this complex workflow. And among these, partly because the company that I belong to, Arch, is the company for doing this pre-production process, and partly because we kind of noticed the importance of this storyboard, ekonte in Japanese, the importance of ekonte. We started to investigate the history of ekonte, as well as the role of ekonte in the current workflow, and also how we can improve the use of this medium in the age of these digital tools. So ekonte is like this. It's pretty much like the illustrations accompanied with these textual explanations, as well as the timing information. So in this case, it shows 7 plus 12, which means 7 seconds plus 12 frames, which means 7.5 seconds. So this is really a kind of specification of how the anime should look like in the end. And this is also the instructional documents for animators to draw the animations. So where did this come from? So this actually came from Disney back in 1950s that we studied. And in Disney, there were actually two kinds of storyboards. One is this, panel of illustrations, which is pretty similar to what we have as the ekonte in Japan. But the other is literally the stories on the board. There is this wall-mounted corkboard, and pre-production process artists, they pasted all these sheets of illustrations and discussed collaboratively how the story should look like. So while this process was really collaborative from the beginning in the Western animation studios, in Japan, somehow this collaborative aspect was missing in the ekonte authoring process. It's really secretively handled by the director and not shared much with others until its completion. So it's really a kind of interesting cultural aspect that we noticed. And this is, of course, impacts the design of the tool for supporting storyboarding in Japanese culture. So I'm also doing this kind of work in the wild to study what's happening and what has happened in the past. So I feel like we not only need help from the ethnographic people, but also from like media theorists, or it's really about understanding the cultural context that's building the current culture. Actually, I have written this small piece of invited article in it's a magazine for students, ACM Crossroads, that was published this summer. And one important message that I embedded in this article is we computer science researchers must always be careful that we are not cherry picking the activities of artists just for the sake of research. I think it's coherent with the message from Jennifer, but artists are making livings out of their art, and it's life. So in this age of computer science where new articles come out every day or every hour, we still live in this society with these artists. And so it's really important to think of how we should do the research. And that's why I organized this edition of the seminar and discuss research in the wild to think of the social cultural or social technical aspects of this creativity supported research. And I think I need to touch on this one too. There was this special interest group meeting on creativity and cultures in computing at KAI this year. And Jennifer was kindly a co-organizer of this special interest group. And there was, I mean, we submitted this in a hurry. It was really, well, yeah, so it was really kind of, I don't know, we felt the need to submit this, and then it was accepted. And when we, gathered at the KAI venue, I was really surprised to see so many people were in the room, like, filling the room. So there is definitely a kind of uprising interest or the movement within this HCI literature, more interest in this, creativity, cultures, society that's impacting our research in some sense. So now this is kind of introduction to the panel, and I'd like to start the panel. It's really unstructured. If any of you have any comments already, you can just start by. If not,
maybe
sure.
just yes. One thing that's really exciting is seeing the range of approaches within this area. So I guess we're still really trying to push the work that we do to be more in the wild. It's incredibly inspiring, and I was familiar with Koya and Jun's work before coming to the seminar, but to see the extent of what's possible in that space, and also all of these areas that we are currently not addressing in our own work. So there's definitely different challenges in some of the domains we're working in versus the domains of animation or fashion design and production. But I would say that's like one thing that I'm optimistic about is how much is like both of your work shows what's possible in this space for HCI research. And so it's very motivating for me personally.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really encouraging.
Yeah, I was also super motivated by the residency program you are doing. So just a few years ago, our lab also had a kind of residency program in which some of the famous artists stay in the lab for a year or maybe 2 years. But at that time, such kind of artists had always had difficulty making research outcomes rather than the artistic outcomes. So I'm like to know how you speak with them, or how do you communicate them, or how do you what do you ask for them to do?
So at some point I want to stress we're not the only HCI researchers who are using a residency model. And so this is something we're actively trying to disseminate more, like information more on the day-to-day strategies that we took, because there's a lot of different approaches. But in our case, the structure with the artist was a lot like how I would engage with collaborators on any project, where we had regular weekly meetings that were outlining and tracking project objectives. So I'd say that I really functioned as a project manager in the residency process, and then graduate student researchers functioned at kind of the same level as the artist, in that everyone had creative objectives that they were trying to fulfill. And it was really my role to help allocate resources and focus and strategy across those areas. The thing we tried to avoid, and so far have avoided, is the risk of having people with software development skills becoming somewhat subservient to the creative interests of the artists, and vice versa, having artists become kind of fabrication technicians subservient to the efforts of developing and testing software. A lot of that we tried to establish upfront by just setting it in writing expectations of making it clear that artists weren't required to use our software tools and vice versa, that we couldn't necessarily guarantee that we would be able to build technologies for all the things that they wanted to do. So far it's been effective, but I would say that that's still something that we struggle with or like consider, because a lot of it has to do with just the fact that the people involved were good at communicating and able to resolve issues in that space.
So what is this paper?
Oh, sorry. I just showed it as a reference, but I think Jennifer is.
Yeah, we drew a lot from Laura Devendorf, who's really pioneered a lot of residencies as a method for technical research in HCI. She's a colleague, and she was someone we consulted a lot when we were setting up our residency. And then also, sorry, yeah. So this was a workshop we ran, but sort of the objective of this was to bring together a lot of different people who either participated in artist residencies or run them and discuss different models. And one of the outcomes was really that a recognition that there's so many approaches in this space. And I think that's what we're still trying to grapple with presenting the outcomes of this work, is how do we give some kind of centralized ideas without making this like a monolithic, really prescriptive research model.
I'm curious if there were like the artist residencies where they accept group artists rather than independent artists.
It's a good question. I think it's coming out of a model that's often, like outside of HCI research, often targeted as a method to within the fine arts for individual artists to push their skills and abilities. So when we asked artists why they were interested in participating, they kind of talked about other residencies they had participated in where they go to work with somebody and learn a new technique, or work with the other artists who are going to be there to push their work in a new direction. So
in some sense, it's like a school where individuals are motivated by themselves and then gather and communicate with each other.
Yeah, but really as a mechanism for like fueling the direction of new work, the idea that you should go somewhere where you're going to be exposed to something that you wouldn't have access to, or some expertise that you wouldn't have access to in other cases. So I think since it comes out of fine art, although collaboration is a big component of that, I haven't seen as many models where Autodesk has reconfigured their residency program, which was focused more on individual artists, to now design firms or project teams. So that might be the closest example that I'm familiar with right now.
So yeah, why I was asking this is because in my case, currently I'm interested in the animation production process where hundreds of people are involved, and I cannot host hundreds of people within the research lab. And I think it's similar in Koya's case, where there are multiple stakeholders are involved in, for example, fashion, because fashion designer might be able to design something, but he or she is not the only person fabricating the clothes, right? So in these kind of cases where collaborations is a key to produce some outcome, I was wondering what we can do. Like, you know, in my case, I consider myself as a kind of researcher in residence model, where I, as a researcher, go into the wild and do something. But is there any kind of approaches that could come to mind? Like, Autodesk, as Jennifer introduced, it seems like the case where they accept the group of people and then host their visits. So it's a game.
By the way, is there any actual examples of researcher in residence?
I think so. I searched for the term, and there were multiple, I mean, at least the search results. I don't see these in concrete details, but But it could be interesting to investigate what it means in the HCI context. But yeah, it says researching in residence model. Yeah.
I will say that one of the limitations of our residency model is that we are an HCI research lab. We're not a ceramics production studio, and we still had a fair amount of flexibility, but I would say our work would have fundamentally different opportunities if instead we went and installed ourselves in a ceramics production facility.
I
just
see.
because they're like, we're just in terms of physical resources
Yep.
And structure, like we cannot support all of the aspects that you would have at a professional ceramics studio. So
I
there
see.
were acceptable trade-offs for
Yep.
us, but that's definitely like a limitation, at least in the manufacturing space, of doing the work within the lab, whereas going to the actual location where the work is conducted just establishes a much more, let's say, like ecologically valid context for
There is a
performing the work.
working place for the artist in residency program in your case, just inside of your lab, or maybe some isolated place for the residency program, or
No, they work right alongside in our lab and alongside all of our other lab members, and then we kind of colonized another lab next to us when we ran out of room. But yeah, we had to start to build out spaces for glazing and work storage and drying and stuff like that. So our actually the result of it is that we run it over the summer, and it kind of displaces a lot of the other work that happens.
another question is, do you guys, or does your school accept designers or artists as a PhD or master course student?
Yes, the Media Arts and Technology program does. So it gives us an opportunity in that space. Although one of the students, Mert Toka, who is one of the main students involved in the residency, comes from a computer science background. So it's not necessary to have a fine art background to do this kind of work.
Yeah, I'm so envious about that situation because I belong to electrical engineering, and even though someone, is super interested in this kind of place, they have to pass the entrance examination of electrical engineering, how the amplifier works, or kind of things. Yeah.
No, I think it brings into discussion like another question for me in this work, which is what kind of skill sets do researchers need to conduct this work? And because I would argue that your experience working with companies is such, I mean, it may be hard to explicitly define that skill set in the way that you would explicitly define the kind of formal knowledge you would need for certain types of electrical engineering or computer science, but it's very clearly an advantage for the work that you're doing. And I think that it's arguably something that, students with the ability to learn or the interest in learning those types of skills.
It is in general super difficult to evaluate the achievements in the wild. Because, for example, I entered the University of Tokyo as a law school student, and I failed in the entrance examination of the graduate school. And somehow when I graduated from the graduate school, a PhD course, I won I think, one of the best awards in the universities. So yeah, in short, they failed in selecting the best students in the entrance examination. So yeah, I'm not sure about the conclusion of but there should be some criteria to select such kind of achievements in the wild rather than some specific fields.
So going back to the skill set thing, I feel like doing research in the wild requires us to speak in a different language. I mean, researchers can speak in their own terminologies, but when we speak to different kinds of people we need different languages, right? And so how do you learn those languages in your previous
Yeah.
cases?
So I say this again and again, but when I entered electrical engineering, I didn't know the math or I didn't know the physics. So I needed to learn everything one by one. And when I started the self-healing UI project, I needed to go to material science lab every day. So maybe I'm not intentionally trying to learn something, because for all the project, I needed to learn anything. So this is a kind of habit. And maybe for everyone, they don't have to stick to one of your maybe favorite things, because I learn everything every time. Maybe you can just do it because I can do it. Yeah.
I mean, I would say it was definitely a component in the work we're doing, any work we're doing when we reach out to artists. There is a reasonable skepticism of people coming from engineering. So I would say a lot of the work is trying to demonstrate our intentions, although I also recognize that I personally have internalized some of the biases of engineering. And so I am not necessarily even aware of like things that I might say that might conflict with what artists view as desirable or beneficial. Although like I do think part of this is about understanding how to speak in terminology outside of our specific research community. I think that can only go so far. A lot of it is also about building relationships.
Yes.
And that has been more important in the longer term. I mean, we have to start from somewhere of trying to communicate, but building and trying to maintain relationships has been a really critical component of the work that we're doing. I sense that it's critical to the work you're doing as well, Jun. And there's not usually like an explicit like point you can make of like, these are all the benefits it's yielded, but there's just been so many opportunities that wouldn't be possible from all the labor that we've taken into doing things like, you know, giving tours of our labs, going to visit people's studios and meeting with them, coming to community events and gallery shows and building, like all of that leads to types of opportunities that we wouldn't have otherwise and took a lot of work to build up. But
yeah, that is actually why I bought the motorcycle, because in order for collaboration, I needed to go so many places every day, including this place as well. And yeah.
So it sounds like a life of the animation producer. I mean, they really move around every day to every place.
So when I was asked, what is the most useful things for research? I answer, motorcycle. Yeah, I'm so serious about this question, and I was trying to write a kind of maybe, blog or something.
I think that's related to how packed this city is, right? At Tokyo, everything is within reach of the motorcycle. In my case, I might say cars, but anyway. So in relation to, so actually, I was looking at these questions at the online.
Oh, in the meantime, I'm gonna ask you more practical question.
Oh,
so which subcommittee do you submit in Kai? Because we are working in such a multidisciplinary field.
we submit to a bunch of different ones. We should submit to the devices and hardware subcommittee, or some of our stuff that ends up being more like fabrication techniques or machines. And we submit to, so CoilCam was submitted to the the blending interaction,
Mhm.
the system subcommittee.
So basically with community.
So primarily, but this year we submitted a couple of things to the design subcommittee.
Wow.
And we have submitted in the past. So I would say that yeah, I I focus more on who is in the subcommittee.
That is true.
Which subcommittee.
That's important.
Yeah.
But we're kind of all over the place at this point.
How about you, Koya? Where do you usually submit?
In our case, maybe 90% is for building devices. But when we submitted to design subcommittee, somehow flower jelly printer, one of our Kai paper, was accepted just for one iteration. And I still don't know why, because the acceptance rate for the design subcommittee is the lowest score of all, I think, in general. So I personally have no clue which subcommittee is the best so
But
far
actually, you were part of the design subcommittee last year?
in the last year. But yeah,
It's that.
being a subcommittee member does not mean he knows about the subcommittee, right?
That's
No one
partly
knows
true.
about the design subcommittee for me.
Interesting. So to me, I usually submit to the systems subcommittee, the engineering interactive systems. But I am these days becoming more interested in the design subcommittee. But I mean, I don't have again no clue, and I haven't submitted
Who
anything.
has a clue for design subcommittee? Maybe Laura.
Yeah, I think I mean, it's a more eclectic committee, but I would say all of us are using design methodologies in our work, so
Yeah.
it feels appropriate. I think one of the challenges of the design subcommittee is they often want a theoretical reference point, if not like contribution as a part of the work, which can be incredibly valuable, but is not like necessarily required in all research that uses design methodologies. So
Yeah.
So okay, let's go into this topic. So probably this is a question for Jennifer, or us. Why governments or public sectors should fund projects in the wild research? Or how do you respond to those kind of criticisms, like in the wild thing can be only handled by the
Why
people
do
in the
they fund, or why don't they fund? Why do they fund?
Well, why do they need to fund?
Okay.
I would say that it is fundamentally aligned with a lot of at least the objectives of within the US, the public funding agencies, particularly the National Science Foundation, in that like the NSF has a mission to integrate intellectual merit with what they call broader impact, but which is like the ways in which connections to their research have repercussions beyond in the specific academic or research community that the work is being targeted at. And actually one of the residency work that we have done so far has been funded by the NSF, which has been wonderful. Some of the feedback we've gotten from the program officers actually is that they really value our integration of intellectual merit and broader impacts, and the fact that the research work is dependent on working with people who, for the most part, would not be considered would not view the NSF as a funding opportunity, and the fact that we are doing work that has impact or the potential for impact in those communities, and those two elements are integrated, was viewed as a major strength for our work.
it sounds really encouraging that the funding agencies themselves are kind of seeking for the opportunities to expand the impact, like, the scope.
I think there's a caveat though, like that it is encouraging, and we have a new collaboration with UCLA that's also not residency specific, but aimed at bringing in communities of practice in forming proposals for future engineering research pathways. But I would say that the challenge is, I think, that there are very different, I mean, similar to some of your work, Koya, there's very different time frames for this kind of work, because you are doing the relationship building, the community formation, the translation of your work, and the outcomes can look really different. So actually that's like something I would see as a contribution that people like us could make in this space to make funding opportunities like this more likely, is trying to articulate how the methods and practices of this work and the outcomes are different, so that funders can look at that and be like, oh, I see, this is how I should be evaluating these kinds of work. Like that's actually at the top of my list to do in this space.
So, well, another question is, should all HCI researchers do in the wild research, or what types of research should benefit from this in the wild approach?
I mean, I can start, but I'd love to hear
Yeah.
your thoughts. I think there is a need and a real benefit to doing in the lab research. So like there are things that it is very difficult to do in the wild. I think the struggle is with the balance and the fact that in the wild research takes many more years, I would say. So I'm less concerned about making a case for like more people to do this, and more about like understanding the incentive models for why people don't do it. Because I think there's a lot, like there's so much amazing things that come out of this, getting to see people use your tools, getting to see products that are produced, like a lot of there's a really amazing outcome from that work. It's just that I think the incentives for that are not always so strong or powerful. So I wonder, like, just like for some of our major research venues, should there be recognitions for, we have things like lasting impact, but things that recognize deployment or
Yeah, that's like a wonderful idea.
Yeah.
So for me, if the outcome is interactive software, you should definitely aim at the research in the wild. And another target is the tangible and the small enough products. So if it's larger than the human beings, I think it'll take more than 10 years to implement such kind of things in the wild. But as long as it is maybe something like a pen or maybe laptop or a cap or such kind of scale, you should always definitely try to explore the wild. Because people do not always work only on one thing at the time. So you can do the different things at the same time. So although one project takes, for example, 3 years, you can do the different project at the same time. Then maybe you can continue working on a really long scale projects. Yeah.
But there are trade-offs. Like, so I think it is incredible to take a research software and do all of the work in building the documentation out, the reliability, and continuing to maintain it. That, like, I totally applaud anyone who does that. But I think it's reasonable to not always do that.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
right.
because like I had a collab, and and I'm not saying she shouldn't have done this, but I had a colleague who made this platform as a research project. People started using it. It was really useful. She got to the end of her PhD and was faced with like, how do I still maintain this? And was also faced with the reality there was a community of users, but it wasn't feasible for her to actively maintain this software anymore. So I feel like that's a very real challenge. Like the best case scenario is people want to use your software.
Yeah, you're right.
But then you have this challenge, like, are you maintaining it for the rest of your time,
Yeah.
you know?
I'm not saying all the projects should be maintained forever. So I sometimes keep working on some projects if it's not super interesting, for example. So yeah, of course, if it's interesting, you should keep on working on it for taking a years.
But I feel like that's a thing to actively factor into the decision of if there are people interested in using your tool.
Mhm.
In some cases, it's fine. People are used to software being depreciated. But in some cases, it might be something that actually becomes really important to people's process. And then I don't want to say that it's unethical to take it away from them, but it's a very different thing than like, it's something that can be the result of this work, so.
Yeah, definitely. So it's pretty much like planting something, right? And sometimes it grows pretty well. There are a community of people, and there could be kind of forest of this product and community of people. Then you cannot stop these trees from growing up, right? And so in my personally, in my case, I have several web services that I maintain. So one particular thing that I published at ACMDIS 2017, which was about making parametric physical computing devices. I still maintain this. And the reason is that I can maintain it pretty much simply with a bit of engineering effort. There is no community management because there is no user. I mean, if there are users, it's really tough to, for example, kill some of the features. And when you want to improve something, you sometimes need to do it from scratch. But because there are existing users, you cannot kill these features, but you keep it and then you kind of rebuild it from scratch aside of this. And you have this maintenance cost with this building new things cost. So it's not like so once it becomes a kind of shared software or shared, how to say, it's not an artifact for yourself anymore, right? It's shared with the commons. And as Jennifer is kind enough to say it's not unethical, but still there is this, at least I feel guilty when I kill some of these features. And this is something that might not happen in the case of the laboratory study, right? There are only like students or a small number of people involved, and you have this, social relationship with these people. So yeah, it's always tough to keep something.
I mean, we have a technology that was just used by a woman who previously has a disability, and she saw the technology is benefiting her. And I don't feel conflicted about the fact that it's still a research product and we can't make it widely available, but it definitely changes how we consider like introducing these things when it's, as soon as you're presenting people with the opportunity of a new possibility, I think there's a responsibility to consider how you frame this, how you engage, because I do feel some responsibility because she contributed so much to how we thought about our technology.
I think I had a similar discussion on open sourcing the software. So there is a friend in the animation production company. They are releasing the tools for professionals for free, but they have never open sourced those tools. And that's because of the maintenance cost for the community. If they open it as an open source, there might be more communication or social responsibilities. But if it's a tool that is just bundled as an executable file and it's for free, then people might just use it, and then that's all. But open source is also kind of a difficult thing to keep working on, I think. Yeah. I think Jennifer mentioned domain-specific thing, and while I think I share the perspective that domain-specific thing is a good thing, I feel it. I mean, I especially felt it when I went to the programming language conferences, where people are really interested in general programming languages. Of course, there are workshops on domain-specific programming languages, but people, researchers there usually wants to focus more on the generalizable features of the programming languages, for example. But I was saying that being domain-specific is actually the key to enable useful features. I mean, at least from the user experience perspective. And so what do you think about the balance between these domain-specific versus like general? Or, I mean, I have an experience of submitting paper and then people say it's a kind of niche, or it's too domain-specific, or, is it, I mean, how can the research community can benefit from these kind of criticisms? Is kind of common reviews that I get when I deal with, for example, in this, Hatsunemiku culture, like, it's no weird culture, not popular in the Western cultures. And it's not necessarily limited to this kind of cultural thing, but do you have any thoughts on?
I mean, I think a lot of that reflects, unfortunately, a Western industrial, like so many biases in academia. Like it's often less about is this too niche, because we see so many examples of HCI and computer science research that is very, people get excited about it because it applies to an area that they care about, but also you can make an argument is incredibly niche. Like a lot of graphics research is so impressive to me, and then it's going to be employed by Pixar. And you can say Pixar is very niche. It's one pretty small company, you can make the same claim versus like the fandom for some of the work you're doing. So I think I actually don't buy that argument. I mean, I think there are things that have the potential for a larger community or a smaller community at the time they were developed, but who's to say what's going to happen in the future? So, but I actually think most of that argument shows a lack of imagination or engagement, which is frustrating. Yeah, I personally get really delighted when I see a tool or a technique applied to a form of expression that I previously wasn't familiar with. So I see that as a benefit. But granted, I'm biased.
To be honest, for most of the questions raised here, I have no answers. But that's a really difficult question. For example, if someone invents a programming language written in Chinese characters, which is super useful only for Chinese, maybe Chi conference will reject the paper because they can't read it. But what is the difference from the domain-specific language and the Chinese-based programming language? There is actually no such big difference between such kind of things. Yeah. And I have no answer. Sorry.
Yeah, I think so. There is another term to represent this kind of thing, which is not domain-specific, but extreme interaction. For example, Wendy McKay and Michel Lafon's lab, they say, like, they name their lab as ex situ, which stands for extreme situation. And their argument is that people can only learn from the extreme use cases or extreme interactions that challenges technologies. And I like this, way of thinking, like, probably when we take the example of Pixar, yes, Pixar is niche, it's only one company, but there are artists and engineers who collaborate with each other, and they have done incredible things. And also, what I felt pretty positive about in the computer graphics conference is that that conference is actually partly formed by these kinds of people, right? And they are kind of building community outside of the company. They pose interesting research questions that can be solved by academic people outside of the company, by the faculties of the universities. And they have built this rich community of researchers and engineers and artists a long time. And this is really great. And also, this is something that, I mean, in the case of the anime industry, we couldn't have done that to that level of, for example, when we see the publications at the international conferences, there are not so many related to anime, whereas the economic impact of anime is like tremendous. But so yeah, this kind of community building in a larger scale seems to be an interesting thing to do. Or, I mean,
Well, I mean, to be clear, I wasn't attacking Pixar's. I think their work is incredible, both in a research and artistic space. But I do think like it's more about pushing, and this connects with Wendy and Michelle's work, not assuming that what is currently the status quo will remain the case, which requires other ways to bring in ideas and insights that go beyond what is dominant in our field right now.
That's right. Yeah, in that sense, I mean, people in the anime industry is like the resistance of the current situation. Oh, what I wanted to say. So then I think the question is how we should evaluate the research quality, or I mean, if domain specificity and niche is a good thing, what is it? I mean, how can we compare each of these very different kind of things coming to this, for example, the same venue of Kai, or is there any more suitable venue, or shall we make a new venue for this kind of thing? I mean, I see a kind of echoed theme between our work, but I haven't been able to successfully explicitly say it in natural language.
Gonna make me answer the evaluation question first.
Yeah.
I think it's not a complete answer to the methodology, but like we're talking about in the wild, like that's not something that happens in a couple of hours. So looking at more longitudinal methods for trying to assess impact is like seems like one approach, and clearly like there's a lot we can pull from the social sciences and also the humanities in this space, but once again, this is at odds with the realities of computer science engineering, where there's a meaningful incentive to turn out work quickly because technology is changing so fast. So I think it's possible that a different venue would offer some opportunities in the space. I mean, longer form venues. I think but it's also something where I think I personally really struggle with the incentive structure in academia around so there are also just different opportunities working in research contexts that are not purely focusing on, say, volume of peer-reviewed research.
So
But-
the question of how we should evaluate the domain-specific projects is similar to the question of how do we evaluate the system contribution? Because system contribution is also really domain-specific, and I still don't know what the system contribution is actually, but there is a paper saying how should we evaluate the system contribution. And with conferences always say, please evaluate the system contribution of the paper, and please refer to this review paper to evaluate such kind of system contribution. So maybe these two questions are almost identical, and I can't answer to the domain-specific one. That means maybe many people cannot answer to the system contribution as well. Do you have an answer?
Systems is actually easier. I mean, people have made arguments that a lot of the outcomes of systems work are not going to be something that comes out of a controlled lab study, but like actually demonstration can be a clear indicator of effectiveness.
Yeah.
And more to the point, like, which is not something we can do in papers, but actually having people directly use it as a form of evaluation that can, like, there are systems papers I've seen where it's self-evident from the interaction what's a contribution. That doesn't solve all of the challenges of evaluation, but it feels easier in some ways than this question of evaluating with communities of practice.
So I think when I review systems paper, I see two things. One is the consistency within the paper. Like there is a kind of assumption, and they want to kind of do something, and there is a system to enable it, and then they kind of evaluate it. So this kind of logical structure, soundness is something that I look at first. And then the next thing I look at is kind of scale or the size or the shape of the study. Like in terms of the size, I mean, if it's, I might say it's kind of, so if the tool is dealing with a pretty small problem, that's not good. I mean, if the problem is well suited and critical, and or is trying to solve something very ambitious, then I mean, again, the soundness is important. So if there is a kind of big picture, the evaluation should be big. So this is again important, but still, the size of the contribution is equally important for me. And so, how to say? I mean, I feel like I know how to evaluate the systems paper, whereas when it comes to the question of how niche it just is, or I mean, usually it cannot be judged within the HCI field, right? For example, the societal issues can only be evaluated within the society. And so we need to draw some sort of theories or information from outside the HCI community, and then that is part of the contributions. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're using, although we're still learning how to use it, but one of our collaborators who I mentioned, Manuel Montoya, who's a PI on the ceramics project, he's an economist, and he is educating us in this framework of value chain analysis, which is a way to try to ascribe different types of cultural, economic, and other types of values to a given product based on how it was made, where it was made, who made it, all these factors. And so it's one way that is very different from methods of assessing the outcome of a digital fabrication workflow to understand, like, what does this mean when someone starts making and selling 3D printed pots versus pots they threw by hand on a wheel? Like how can we assess this with how their market
Ah.
might evaluate their work or how they might have to communicate differently how this is a desirable object or how it fits with their tradition. So I'm still learning how to do that. It is, it is challenging, but that has been tremendously useful.
Yeah.
So the final goal might be to write a paper of research contribution of community-based projects or research contributions of domain-specific projects. Maybe that is still an open problem. Although I still think the system's contribution itself is an open problem, even for me, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of reviewers and they have different opinions. But I mean, I don't remember whether it was a WIST review or Kai review, but there is an instruction to review the paper holistically, right? They really want us to review the paper from like looking at the whole picture rather than focusing on some of the spots. Yeah. Well,
it is already past 5 p.m.
Yes. And you want to touch on the topics that haven't been touched in this dialogue?
We've covered a lot of things. I guess
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that we're focusing so much on the how do we disseminate this work? How is it received? How do these models fit? I do think that's at the heart of the challenge or opportunity here is finding ways to make it less difficult for other people to adopt models that fall outside of traditional engineering development and evaluation. Because I would say that's the biggest downside of this work is I spend so much time carving those pathways that don't already exist. And that's not the creative part, but that is the necessary part. And that feels like if we could improve that part, which I think papers, conference incentives can do, then it opens the door to a lot more people being able to do this work.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I can say there is no right answer to this question, but I also say that I'm not only working for the really long-term projects, but I also work on really different short-term projects. And I only bet for the possible project. Yeah. So maybe the audience shouldn't think that this kind of people are only working for the project that lasts for years. We usually work for half a year in the most cases, and we are gonna judge the short-term results. Yeah, maybe this is the biggest hint for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, while we, in this particular edition, focusing on research in the wild, when I collaborate with students, I never force them to do the work, the kind of work that I am doing, and that's because it's too tough. It really needs kind of long-term collaboration with people in the wild, and yeah, as Jennifer said, it's something that I want to kind of address somehow in a methodological way, or I don't know. I mean, in the case of Koya, I think he said it was fortunate that he was in the Kawahara Sensei's lab and had the collaboration with the startup company. But that kind of environment is something that we can give to the students, right? So as a community of researchers who are involved in this kind of long-term projects, we can invite students to get involved, right? That's something that we can do in a kind of practical manner. That's something that I felt today's discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a great experience for students.
Yeah.
And that is a great conclusion, I think.
Yeah. So for students and researchers interested in this kind of research, I think it's the best to contact these people. I mean, we're always looking for the collaborators, right? And
Yeah.
it's really important to kind of have a community of researchers. So, yeah, so it's really my pleasure our pleasure to welcome two of these invited speakers. And for the audiences, thank you so much for
Thank you
staying with us for so long time. Thank you so much. And let's applaud the invited speakers again.
And applause to June for organizing.
Thank you. Thank you. As I said, this is tentatively the last edition of the seminar. So I'm not sure about the next step about the seminar series myself. I mean, this is the 6th edition. I have no plan for the next. There'll probably be a kind of workshop following the seminar series. One domestic workshop planned in February or March. I haven't fixed the schedule yet, but if people are interested in this kind of creative HCI, that a particular workshop or symposium would be a very interesting opportunity. So keep in touch, and thank you so much for coming. And so thank you for all these opportunities. Thank you.